Subcommittee's on. All right,
Yeah.
Billy, why don't you kick us off and then we'll kind of lay out the plan for the day.
Okay. Let's see. Good morning. This is the September 24th meeting of the Vermont Climate Council Agricultural and Ecosystem Subcommittee. We're going to meet from 8:30 to noon today. Let me just pull up our little agenda. Let's see. We have a number of topics on our agenda, some administrative tasks. Initially, we're going to hear an update from some stakeholder meetings that occurred earlier in the week. Then we're going to begin a long block of work on our matrix of pathway strategies and actions with a break in the middle for some public comment. Then we're going to hopefully wrap that work up and move on to the presentation that Abby and I need to give the council next week, and preparing for that. Then hear from Jane and Marion some updates on work of the steering committee around prioritization and the equity screen. And then hopefully have some time to look at work planning and priorities for the month of October as we kind of move to take our full matrix into a more prioritized list of actionable recommendations. And then there'll be another chance for public comment. We'll wrap at noon. So that's where we're at. Given that, any comments or questions from the subcommittee on that draft agenda or the minutes that were posted from last week's meeting? Okay, seeing no reactions, we will consider those both approved and we can move on. So the first topic is this update from the stakeholder meetings. I think we last week at this meeting heard from folks who were involved in the agriculture stakeholders meeting, and that went well. Last week, I guess it was this week, we had two stakeholder meetings sponsored by this subcommittee targeted at, the first one was for folks who are owners of forested parcels and those working in the forest processing sector and the forest product sector. And then the second was the following day, focused primarily on conservation and advocacy groups who have an interest in kind of forest and natural lands. And, you know, Charlie and David were very active in organizing them and did a ton of work with outreach and coming up with questions and presentation. And I, you know, will certainly want to hear Charlie speak, but I think overall they both went really well. I think the landowner and forest sector one was particularly good and well attended. And there was a really nice dialogue in the breakout groups. And I think a lot of what we heard supported our interests of diverse pathways to help landowners keep their forests and forests. And that, you know, while there is an interest by some in more passive management, that there's still a strong desire and value to kind of a forest products economy that helps support that ownership and the associated sectors. The conservation meeting was fine. You know, I think it was a little less robust from my experience, but we still did get good feedback from folks, and it was a good opportunity to engage. So I don't know if Charlie or others who were at those meetings and played a leadership role want to share any other thoughts, but that was my takeaway. Charlie says no, apparently. Okay.
Hey, Billy, this is Jane.
Hey.
Sorry, I'm on my phone. So I just wanted to offer that one of the maybe not surprising topics that had a lot of controversy was carbon credits. And I, like in the groups that I participated in, there was like wide diversity of opinion if that was a viable option or strategy, I should say. And I just thought I wasn't surprised by that, but it was interesting to hear the conversation on either side of it.
Yeah. No, good point. I think there was some concern that offsets just enable future emissions. But that's a good point.
Yeah. And that they don't really have an additive value to climate resilience. And I shouldn't say climate resilience, I should say sequestration, in that they don't really show an additionality with carbon sequestration. But one really interesting point that I heard that I had not heard was that it was a really good strategy to let forests grow for 40 years so that you could do better timber management ultimately and get paid for that growth during the time. So it wasn't really only about letting forests grow. It was about a strategy of letting them grow to do better forest management in the long term.
Right. Yeah, helping folks carry that growth longer between harvests to wind up with a more valuable product that could serve some of the structural needs of the more carbon intensive materials and still reach some revenue in the interim. So Charlie's back on camera. So just Charlie, if you have any other thoughts, since you're so integral to those stakeholder meetings, feel free to share them and then we can take any questions and move on.
I think they went well. Yeah, I think it was great. Sorry to miss the part of the conversation there.
All right. Any questions, other thoughts on that topic? Okay.
Billy, has David provided summarized notes yet or no?
I don't know that I've seen them, but I feel like I've gotten like 100+ emails a day related to this work in the past week. So I have a hard time knowing what exactly is in my inbox, but I don't think I've seen a compiled list of feedback from those meetings yet.
Shane, I can check in with both Catherine and David for kind of notes for all of our pieces in terms of that. So happy to kind of have an answer for you first thing Monday.
Yeah, I do think like detailed notes for those will help inform the next step of prioritization and just direct feedback on some of the actions. So that'll be great. Yeah,
no, it definitely was helpful to hear from folks with some specific feedback on the things we're talking about, and we'll share those notes with everyone else once we have them.
One other thing, Billy, to note, sorry about last night. I looked again at the survey we sent people at the end of the ag meeting, and we had 8 people fill it out as of yesterday. So I did send out those results to everybody. They're in a format that you have to kind of open up a website. So I can't do it, but I'll have a person create a PDF of that. So you all have a version of that too. And I'll get that out to you all on Monday as well.
Thank you. Let's see. All right. Moving on, right on schedule. So I think as we discussed on Wednesday, really our goal today is to get as far through our matrix of pathway strategies and actions as possible so that we have a final kind of best effort list to share with the council today. In advance of the discussion and presentation next Tuesday. Marley, Judson, and others did a ton of work trying to pull together all that information in one navigable document. And we sent that out to you around noon yesterday. With some instructions from Pat on kind of how we're hoping to use the time, understanding that we probably can't hit on every single action, even in this long meeting today, but that hopefully folks have done some work on their own and can bring the areas that they have the most interest and concerns to the conversation today. Likewise, we did have a number of items that we were unresolved from our meeting last week that we'll hope to kind of go back to and resolve. And with the acknowledgement that this is not a final product, this is going to be communicated as our kind of current best effort with all of its warts and bumps and bruises. And that, we have time to continue the refinement and work towards building consensus around a final set of recommendations. So unless anyone has any questions, I may just hand it off to you, Pat, to do it.
So here's our thoughts. We want to check on process first. So our thought is, since we have to get this spreadsheet in today around noonish, since it's the end of our meeting, it's complete. It has everything in it. It has comments, changes, some issues. And so what we thought we would do is work to work this as much as we can. And when we're done. And the whole thing will go to the Climate Council as our best effort to date so that nothing is left out. And even if there's uncertainty or, some things still in yellow, so be it. It will still make sure that the Climate Council has kind of the full sense of the work. So first, I want to make sure that that is acceptable to folks in how we proceed.
No.
Did you say more?
Yes, I would like it to say something like, you know, these are the, I wrote it down someplace yesterday, but I don't remember. These are the recommendations. I think the first recommendation should say that we're not done because of a lack of time, and that this is only a draft. And we need more time to finish and discuss.
Pat and Judy, I might just respond real quick that on the timeline for the council and the expectation that's been clearly delivered to the council is that this is a draft, that it is in no way comprehensive. So happy to make that clear on the work product, but that's what the messaging has been to the council 100% at this moment in time too.
Great. I still think it should be recorded.
Judy, I'm going to put in chat, like, I think when we distribute the thing or at the top of the spreadsheet, we'll figure it out, is essentially the points that you made, it that we need more time. It's just a draft. There's a lot more work left to do.
Yeah. Thank you.
You bet. Okay, so again, with the caveat that we send this with clarity, this is a draft, it's a work in progress, so there's lots of work left to do. We don't have enough time. Any other thoughts about taking this matrix as far as we can? And then we'll distribute it with the caveats Judy noted around noonish. Okay, so there's a few things I just want to note as we kind of go through this, and we'll talk about how in a second, is there, I know Judy, you sent some good comments to Abby that she put into the spreadsheet. So I might have a slightly different version than you all have. It's the same spreadsheet, just some additions. So that will be helpful to walk through today. I know there's some rivers, headwaters, floodplain issues. Lauren, you had one in particular you named that we want to make sure we touch on. And I know David mentioned that in the last meeting. We have, Charlie, I know that you made some changes to the forest, or some of the forest ones. So we may want to look at those specifically, and I'll just need to have your help in finding where. And then there were a lot of good new suggestions, particularly around food systems. So they're kind of sitting in a no pathway tab at the moment, but some of them I think are compelling. So I want to make sure we at least touch on those before we end this morning as well. So those are the kind of items that I named specifically. And as Billy said, there's still some stuff in yellow here we haven't really talked through fully. Ryan.
Yeah, just a note, when there are comments that haven't been fully carried through, or there's an editorial addition to a point that there's evidence contrary to an editorial comment, how are we going to navigate addressing that before noon?
Yeah, Ryan, you might want to give us an example just so I know, make sure I understand what you meant.
So there's editorial comments in red underneath some comments on Pathway F, for which there is other parts of a comment that were submitted that are either not in there, which include reference supporting the claims that are made. And so I'm just trying to figure out how best to make sure either the editorial comment is removed or evidence supporting those comments is included in the comment.
I mean, I think we'll do the best we can to clean those up. We may not fully be able to, just to note that. So I think let's do the best we can as we see those, and then we may need to put another caveat to the ones Judy mentioned regarding that column.
Patrick, I have some questions too. There's still numbers missing, and there were others down there that were on the other sheet that you showed us last time. And you said that those weren't presented because everybody agreed, but clearly everybody doesn't agree on some of the ones that you said you left off.
Yeah, so that we're going to go through that. I think we'll use the matrix itself so we don't have any confusion between slides and matrix. And so there may be ones that we haven't talked about yet that are either disagreement or we just haven't talked about yet. We'll get to as best we can today, and it'll just stay. This will be a comprehensive spreadsheet. So our intent is everything stays, so nothing's lost. If, Judy, we lost something in our versions of spreadsheets, that's a different issue. So we will definitely have to look for those things because, you know, a lot of folks worked hard and had lots of hands on. So it is possible in versions of spreadsheets, something got lost in translation. We'll have to look out for sure. I don't know, Judy, if that helped or not.
Well, yeah, that's pretty much what you said last time too.
So Judy, are you concerned, just I want to be clear, are you concerned that there were things in an earlier version of the spreadsheet, say comments you made that somehow didn't get onto this next version of the spreadsheet?
No, that's not what I'm saying. You said last time that some of the numbers were left off because there was no conflict, but there was conflict.
Got you. Okay. Right. So on those, we will, if people, again, we probably can't talk about all of them today. What I tried to pull in the slides was one that seemed to have a lot more comments. That doesn't mean that one comment wasn't in fact a conflict. So we're gonna, as people have, Judy, what I've done is I know you sent Abby some specifics. So I have, those are in yellow so we can look at those specifically. If there are others that may be in conflict, if people want to name them today, we can try our best to get to them. And, you know, we'll do the best we can. And just to your point, as you started, this is a draft and there's still plenty of stuff we've got to talk about and prioritize through both the equity screen and the other stuff.
Thank you.
And our intent is to try to leave this comprehensive, so nothing that you all, any work that you've done is not lost to the council, so they kind of have it all, messy as it may be in some cases. Brian? Brian, did you have another point?
Not at this time. I'll raise my point specifically to whoever is managing the spreadsheet to ensure that's included.
Okay. So Billy, I just want to turn to you. Do we want to just group, do we want to just start going through pathway A through, you know, each and do the best we can in getting through the spreadsheet? How do you want to, what's the best way to do it? That is my thought, but there may be other ways to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, Pat, I'd largely defer to you on this. You know, I think to the extent that we can move quickly and really just focus on the places where folks have comments, I think that's going to be necessary.
And what I want to make sure too is that we cover the things that are most important to you all. So if we're getting bogged down in a place and people say we need to move on to cover other things, then we should do so. I'm going to partly depend on you all to say, hey, we need to move on. Let's just talk briefly about who's going to manage the spreadsheet. I actually have it up. I'm happy to do it. If it's better for someone else to kind of manage it, whatever version we type into is going to be the one we send, so we don't have version control problems. So I don't know if someone wants to manage the spreadsheet, want me to do it, but we should figure out who that is.
I'm fine with either you doing it or if Marley or Judson, who have been kind of managing it, are willing, that's another option. But I agree, one person should be the controller.
Marley or Judson, are you able to, or do you want me to do it?
No, I'm happy to. I assume you're talking about editing directly into the spreadsheet as we talk.
Yes, and I've got a spreadsheet that Abby it's the same, it's the template everybody got yesterday, but it's got some additional points that Abby was able to enter to on behalf of Judy. So what I'd like to do is send that to you right now so you can project it.
Yeah, that's fine. I was planning on taking narrative notes because I think it's good to have a second version of what was said in addition to what's in the spreadsheet. So if someone else is able to do that, it would be helpful. I'm happy to do either write into the spreadsheet or take narrative notes, but I encourage that we do both.
And Judson, are you able to take notes?
Or maybe Judson's better off in the spreadsheet. Totally up to you guys.
All right. What I'm going to try to do here is get the spreadsheet to you ASAP. So give me one moment.
And can someone remind me what's new in this spreadsheet? Is it only the comments from Judy to Abby?
Yeah, everything's the same except there's some peach or kind of tan colored comments in part that Judy that they're highlighted specific to some of Judy's questions.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'm going to send this to both Judson and Marley right now. It should be coming your way if my email works. Why we wait for that? There is, Lauren, there's a piece you sent specifically on, I think, river corridors. It's also something of interest to David as well. While we wait to kind of get the spreadsheet up and running, I think it's probably worth having that conversation. So I don't know, Lauren, whether you want to just kind of explain the point and the comment, and why don't we talk about that a little bit first as we get the spreadsheet pulled up.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was late till Wednesday's meeting and I wasn't sure if river corridors had already been discussed. When I hopped on and asked, it was said that we hadn't covered it yet and it was looking like we weren't going to. So I asked in the chat last time if it made sense for me to put in my thoughts on the action to maybe quell some concerns or clarify any questions that needed clarification. So I sent that last night to this group. Happy to walk through it or answer any questions that you might have, but it's the action on pathway F. I think it's been moved to pathway F. Let me look for it. Expand the flood hazard area and river corridor rule to incorporate statewide jurisdiction and permitting for river corridors as modeled by the state's wetlands and lakes and ponds programs.
And Lauren, I just pulled up your piece, if that's okay. So that's got the action at the top. And so this is a proposed action that you support, is that correct?
Correct.
And then the rationale, and then below it is the rationale for why.
Yes.
Great. So questions for Lauren, concerns about this recommendation? David, I know you had thoughts, so curious what people think about this recommendation.
Ryan, is your hand up?
Ryan, is your hand up, or is that or that's an artifact? Okay.
That's legacy. I guess just one of my questions is DEC River Corridor Program, their permitting schema. It does apply to farms, right? It's enumerated in the RAP for construction of buildings. I'm just trying to understand where that permit program, it is a statewide permit program, as I understand it. So I just a bit more background as to what this proposed action would do effectively. It would supersede other authorities that municipalities have. I don't fully understand the impact for non-agricultural operations which are subject to river corridor. I guess what would this mean? Like, what would this look like in practice if implemented?
Lauren, do you want to say more?
But I see David's hands up, and I'd love to hear his take since mine's all written down.
Okay, David, over to you.
Well, I was gonna, it's been a couple of years since I was deep in the weeds on DEC's permitting programs. But there's a couple of ways that DEC plays a role. One is through Act 250 permits. So if it's jurisdictional under Act 250, which of course is really large development, or if it's there's town plans or there's some town decisions that have to be approved. And then there's a degree to which the way that the emergency, there's an incentive in the emergency, state emergency funding that matches FEMA money that encourages towns to adopt, river corridor protections. But all of those miss the bulk of the development that happens in our river corridors and floodplains, which is below the jurisdiction of Act 250, or it's really largely left to towns, and DEC doesn't have the capacity to, or resources or really authority to enforce it. And Lawrence put in the point that, not very few towns have adopted them, and it's unclear how many of those that have adopted them are actually enforcing them. And it is, of course, it's a really sensitive topic in Vermont because it addresses a fair amount of potential development. And so the legislature hasn't really addressed this effectively over the years. At the same time, even after Irene, and even in spite of lack of ability to get buildings and floodplains insured effectively, there continues to be a steady pace of development in floodplains and river corridors. And it's putting more and more buildings and communities at risk. And even when the entity that builds in the floodplain does so in a way that protects their own building, what they're essentially doing is displacing all of that water that then causes further damage downstream. And so, a community like Montpelier, for instance, could allow all sorts of development in the floodplain and have dramatic impacts downstream in Waterbury and Richmond and other places and cause significant damage as a consequence and not bear the responsibility for that. So leaving it to towns doesn't really make good public policy sense. So there's been, I've been long an advocate for that DEC should have the ability to require permits. And it doesn't necessarily mean that a building doesn't get built, although it might, but it typically simply means that there has to be some way to make sure that it's not making the flooding and the damage downstream worse, or that it's putting the actual occupants of that building or, particularly if it's housing, at risk. And that's a problem as the flooding continues to get worse and the extreme, weather events. There's no question, right, that we are seeing a dramatic increase in the frequency, intensity of rainfall events. It makes no sense to allow developers to continue to build in the floodplains. It doesn't make any sense, frankly, for anyone, including farmers, to be building structures in the floodplain. It's not good for the farmers and it's not good for people downstream. So that's my take on it, my advocacy and my understanding of the nature of and this recommendation doesn't drive straight to what I want, but it's a good step in that direction.
Billy.
Sure, and I'll try to be brief because I know we got a lot to get through. So just a few points of clarity. There is a statewide jurisdiction over river corridors currently through the DEC special flood hazard river corridor rule. It requires permits for development in the special flood hazard area and river corridor for projects that are exempt from municipal zoning. It's typically energy projects, agriculture, some state projects. That was a conscious decision made when that law was first enacted to limit jurisdiction of that permit program to certain types of development that was not developed at the municipal level. David probably remembers that well. He was the commissioner at the time of DEC and led that effort. I think there's always been a vision to kind of expand the jurisdiction of that program to other forms of development. And I'm supportive of that. I don't think having it modeled over, making reference to like the shorelines and wetlands programs doesn't make sense. They're totally different things. And I think the allusion to statewide is a little misleading because it's already a statewide program. So we may want to just come back with some language after today that talks about expanding, the jurisdiction generally of that program, but, since it already is statewide. So I'm fine with that. I do take some issue with some of the conclusions Lauren's drawn in her kind of supporting documents, but we don't need to get into that right now.
Yes, I pretty much agree that there should be no permitting in floodplains or floodways because what's happening every time they get flooded, they complain and they spend all this money rebuilding, knowing they're just going to get flooded again, which brings me to the concern where we've had discussions about cluster building in villages. And Montpelier, for example, that David brought up, was built in the bottom of Lake Vermont. So any building is going to add to the level of water in the bathtub, is going to raise it no matter what, because it's a floodplain. And the same with Brandon. Brandon Village has been flooded out at least 6 times, completely moving houses and businesses into the middle of the river. So why would we want to encourage cluster building in communities that are being continuously flooded? And so I just think because sometimes communities are built in the river corridor, I think there needs to be an exception to this cluster building thing that we've been discussing for these towns that are there's town villages that are repeatedly rebuilding in the same place over and over again. I mean, Montpelier is a perfect example where the Dog River and the Stevens River and all those tributaries merge. The solution Montpelier has right now is to put a bucket loader there to break the ice up.
And Judy, there's also some additional cluster comments in, I think, the land use section that we'll have to come back through to your point to cover for sure. Lauren, you had a point. I have a thought about maybe a language revision, but Lauren, go ahead.
Yeah, well, one, I'm happy to remove, as I said in my document, the as modeled by states, wetlands and lakes and ponds programs. They should be similar programs in my book. But again, happy to remove that. It doesn't really help. It just helps make the case for why it makes sense that they would be similar. For the jurisdiction language, and maybe Pat, you're going to try to fix this for me to help accommodate Billy's concerns, but happy for it to be changed to something like to incorporate statewide jurisdiction and permitting authority, because that is currently not what is happening within the capacity of the rule as it stands now. The majority of our river corridors are not regulated but through this rule because of the patchwork jurisdiction that I outlined in the document here. And then I don't know if my document's going to be posted to the public website. So if it's not, I just want to hammer home on public record that I fundamentally believe that this is both a life safety concern for Vermonters, and it is a huge tax saving benefit for Vermonters. Because there is not statewide jurisdiction or permitting authority, it has led to inequitable permitting across the state, which means some towns are more vulnerable than others. It means that some homeowners are unable to access federal funds or access them easily for both, floodproofing, elevating, moving their home, having their home bought out, even just accessing flood insurance. And so I think, the inequity that we've seen, the costs that we see, and as David said, flooding and fluvial erosion is only going to increase in the coming decades. So it's going to get worse, and lives lost will also be worse. So I will be standing strong behind this one as we move forward.
So what I did,
any questions?
To suggest the language changes, which I said revise, because it sounds like it's not expand as much as like you have to revise the rule, and it would incorporate statewide jurisdiction permitting authority, Lauren, to your point. And I just said for all kinds of development, because it already has some kinds of development, I guess, already in the statewide jurisdiction. So I wonder if we can fuss with the language any more than we need to, and then see if there's concurrence on this. Billy, does the language change capture? I think you're.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay, so anybody object to including this language in the matrix? We'll figure out. We'll go back to where it goes in a minute when we go through the matrix. But is that anybody object to that? Okay, I'm not hearing any objection. So Marley, just know when we get to that piece, we'll need to incorporate that language from the chat into the spreadsheet. Okay. Good work. So let's dive into pathway A. We'll try to focus on those things in color, but Judy, if you see things that aren't color that you want to make sure we get to, just let us know, or anybody else as well. So Marley, do you mind pulling up the spreadsheet? Okay, it's slowly coming up.
It's not there yet.
No. It says you're sharing.
Okay.
By the way, David said he was on. He had to jump off. He's going to try to come back on.
And now it says, all right. For a second, it said my screen sharing was paused, but now it's.
There we go. Now you got it.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, and people it may be useful if you have your spreadsheet open. I know these things are bears to manage. We may want to you may want to look at it yourself as well. So first, I think it's worth going to which is ID number 29 now. Right. We've got, go up one where you were. Yeah, there you go. This was an issue around increasing forested buffers, and people said, well, does that mean it takes away from ag land? So I'm not sure what to do with this one, but it clearly is an outstanding issue. So I don't know if people have any quick thoughts about fixing it, or if we can't quick it fix it. What we do is leave it highlighted as an issue, and we'll come back to it after today. But any quick thoughts on this one?
I mean, I think as I said before, we support and fund a lot of projects for the reforestation of buffers on agricultural cropland and or WRE program for restoration of wetlands. So that's absolutely something the state supports, or at least the Agency of Agriculture. You know, the RAP mechanism I don't think is appropriate for that, owing to the limitations in state law. So I think outreach and funding for this TA and FA and education outreach, I think are important. The regulatory framework is RAPs deal with much more than just water quality. It's zoning, it's environment, it's groundwater. So, you know, RAPs should be mentioned as a strategy for amendment under this, and definitely support that. Just for this specific topic, it's probably not the best place owing to the limitations on requirements for a riparian forest buffer when ordered by the Secretary for a farmer. That would make this not efficient, cost effective, or practical.
So Ryan, if we just strike the parenthetical, would it be good? So if we just, you know, there's that EG through, you know, those, if we just strike that, will that be helpful?
Yeah. If you struck both of those EGs, I think that would be just fine.
Okay. Anybody with that amendment, we get rid of the parentheticals. Anybody have any concerns about this one? Because we can kind of turn it to include it otherwise. Jake.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what the actual language is there. So there's the first portion, provide incentives to restore, increase, and then there's the outreach and increase incentives. And I think what I remember in previous conversations and the point that Ryan was making is that, you know, those incentives exist. So the notion of sort of providing them is not the correct kind of terminology, but the notion of increasing the incentives is sort of more accurate to what's kind of already in place. So
Sounds like the middle one then is we should strike actually the whole first part again, because outreach and increase incentives is actually the language we want. So we strike that. Yep, exactly. So then we have a short, sweet sentence about outreach and increase. Jake,
and
good
I guess, I don't know the way that reads of outreaching. So is it increasing the incentives and outreach to restore or increase forested buffers?
I think it's increased outreach and incentives both, right? So our increase is in the wrong place.
Okay, so the sort of word order there just needs to be changed.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Marley, you're doing real awesome time. Okay, anybody have any concerns or questions?
Barely started. It'll go down here from here.
You're doing great. Don't forget to say,
set the bar high, Marley.
Any questions or concerns? Okay. Any questions, concerns? Okay.
Is it possible, Marley, to just zoom in the screen a little bit so we just see the cells you're working in? Because I'm blind and I'm on a laptop, so it's just hard for me to see those words.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I think you're right down at the plus minus thing.
I know, but it isn't moving.
Oh, all right. Don't worry about it.
All right. Again.
There we go.
There you go. Perfect.
There you go. Okay.
Now I can see it. Thank you.
Now, if we go down to tagged item 56, and this is where it gets a little confusing because we made a bunch of changes. So go back about what it is. So there's a concern about, we'll go up one to the peach colored. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So this is where it's confusing. So we've got this create certification or procurement standards for sustainable carbon friendly forest management and products, including biomass. There's a concern about biomass. And then we also did some revisions of the language. And so maybe this is not relevant anymore. So first, Charlie, you can maybe help us track whether this is an artifact or it's something different from the changes I think you made to 56 from last time.
I don't think this is anything new from last time.
Okay.
Like I don't think this has been changed at all. I don't recall addressing this one specifically.
Okay, good. So I think, Judy, I think you have a concern about biomass in there, so let's talk about that. Judy, go for it. Judy, you're on mute.
I appreciate what Charlie said last time, explaining about the biomass plants that are in place and helping them to get in better alignment with various standards against pollution. But the fact that biomass is in there is concerning to me because that we want to encourage it. I mean, I understand helping that plants that are there, but I don't want to encourage it. I mean, the pollution and the amount of carbon put into the space, into the air from these biomass plants is equivalent to that of coal plants. And
Well,
we're,
sorry.
yeah.
No, go ahead. So Judy, I wonder about if we struck the word, if we struck the phrase including biomass, just got rid of that, and it's this broader statement.
Well, it's in other places too. And I don't understand why people are not questioning the fact that McNeil is the largest polluter in the state. We have an example of how it doesn't work. I mean, you don't live around there. People who live around there have suffered from asthma all the time. There's so many problems with that.
Billy and then Charlie.
I don't know if it would be helpful to just kind of be more precise with our language here. I think that what we're talking about wood fuel for thermal applications largely. We're talking about modern wood heat. We're talking about Vermonters using forests to heat their homes in an efficient and relatively clean way. I don't read this as exclusively talking about the two electric-led biomass facilities in Vermont. I think a lot of our work is focused on forests as a thermal fuel source through modern, efficient equipment. So I think that's very important to me. I think that is a strategy for carbon resilience and adaptation in Vermont. So that's something that's important to me. It may be helpful to kind of separate those things out as we move forward.
So Billy, I did some research. As you know, I have a learning curve on this kind of stuff. And basically, the scientific papers I read was that there was so much carbon and other heavy metals released and particles released from these places that there was not an offset. And matter of fact, plants who were applying for recertification couldn't provide documentation to show that there was a net zero.
Right, and I'm not talking about those facilities. I'm talking about modern wood heat at the residential district level that Vermonters are using to heat their homes, schools, and businesses. So it's not these larger electric-led plants. But
Well,
obviously
there needs to be clarification about this because the word biomass to those living in the Burlington area denotes something different.
Charlie, go ahead. And then I want to suggest some language maybe to the points made. Charlie.
I think Billy captured what I was going to say pretty well. I just think that, biomass has become one of those things that, as Judy just pointed out, it can mean very different things to different people when it's used in different places. And it's become something that evokes really strong emotions, right? And so, I think Judy's completely right. I don't know how to address that here other than what we try to include around increasing efficiency where we can and essentially doing better where we can, acknowledging that, there are some really serious problems with some of these facilities that need to be addressed that we're not looking to, amplify by any means. I think the main thing here is that the word biomass is a charged word. I just don't know how to address that.
Charlie,
without writing a novel, essentially.
Judy's point, I tried to be more, and to Billy's point, try to be more specific. So get rid of the word biomass in this recommendation and add something kind of what I just tried to put in writing in the chat what Billy just said. And I don't know.
You can get rid of biomass, but I think the point of adding biomass was to actually call out specifically that, like, in that area, we need to refocus on it and do better. So in a way, I feel like that's kind of like undoing an emphasis that gets at the points that's being raised, if that makes sense. Like, so anyway,
point.
but feel free to take out biomass if it's causing consternation. I think the overall thing is still getting.
I think to all your points.
Pat, I can't get to the chat while I'm in sharing, so.
Yeah, no problem.
If
I
there's
can, and
language
I'm
that
not,
people agree with, I can just add it later.
and I can read it to you, but once if people even agree. So Judy, I don't know whether my formulation helps at all or not.
I'm sorry, I was reading the chat. What did you say?
No, just exactly what you just said, what you were doing is, I tried a formulation in there about wood as thermal fuel source for homes, schools, and businesses. And I don't know if that helps address the concern you raise about kind of industrial biomass, for lack of better terms.
Well, it does, as long as you're looking for sustainable ways to do that. As long as the word sustainable is in there.
So it would be in part for what is a sustainable thermal source. Is that the right, would that be the right adder?
I think so. I mean, I don't
Sustainable's already in there.
I know. That's what I said, as long as it
Yeah.
stays in there. I don't understand why I'm the only one questioning this. Why isn't somebody else concerned about biomass? What am I missing? I've been reading everything I can.
Well, I
And-
guess I would say, Judy, I think what Charlie's suggesting is that there's these existing plants there, and this recommendation is to make those plants better, to kind of reduce the harm that they may be causing through improved procurement standards. So,
And I'm aware of that. He talked about that last time we spoke, and I'm in agreement with that. I'd actually take them down, but if you want to work on making them better first, go ahead. But there's also a section where they want to cover development of new ones. Somewhere in there, in here, it mentions that as well. And I don't understand why I'm questioning this and nobody else considers this an issue. I feel like I'm missing something.
I would say this, I don't think we've had enough time, and Judy, I'm not sure you're alone. I should check on that in a minute, but I wonder, just because of time, we should just put under actions old in that yellow spot, is biomass needs further discussion at what scale and level by the subcommittee. And we just, we're not get there today with language, but we clearly need some further discussion as we're just starting to have. Because I think you're.
This is Alex, Pat. I had my hand up. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if you saw it.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
So I read through all those comments. I'm the energy person at the Agency of Ag. I don't deal much with, these kind of scale of plants, but I did deal with them when I was in Wisconsin. And the way I read this recommendation, and it was an interesting comment by Jake in the comments actually about decoupling this, that might be a way to handle it, electric versus thermal. But the point that I read in all of this was, let's do this better. And looking at McNeil, it's been talked about for at least 20 years, how to use the waste heat from McNeil into district heating for Burlington, and nothing has happened. What a wasted opportunity. Let's look at that. Where is that? How are people heating their homes in Burlington and could have been heated with no net gain in emissions through the waste heat from McNeil? That's what we're talking about, improvements. That's how I read this whole thing. And I see it as a transition. Now we're getting a little bit out of our realm here for sequestration and how that all is done. And one thing we might want to do on this is to look into the kinds of things that Judy is talking about with life cycle emissions, right? Do these things actually pencil out on a life cycle basis? Just the way we might want to recommend that we start looking at life cycle emissions of electricity that's coming into Vermont. What are the emissions up in Quebec that are saddled onto our carbon footprint? Not that clear. So again, I see this whole thing as, how do we improve this? It's a transition strategy. Let's get some better numbers on some of these emissions things. That's where I saw this one.
Okay, so again, I'm going to move us forward because we're not going to get done here. So I think we need to know biomass needs further discussion. I think we should put in there, Marley, we may want to decouple thermal from electric, to Jake's good point. And I think we'll note it in yellow as a concern.
Patrick, I'd like to comment on what Alex just said.
Sure, go for it.
Alex, part of that hasn't happened where they want to capture the steam, because McNeil should have never been built there in the beginning. It's built in a floodplain. It's built on a native burial site, and they had to put up a fence around it to keep the looters out from digging up the yard to get the archaeological artifacts. So it should have never been built there to begin with. To expand it will be compounding one problem on top of another.
That's a good issue. And I hadn't, wasn't aware of those issues, and they are a whole another set of issues.
Great. All right, so let's thanks. I think we are not done yet. We're just not going to get there today. So let's move on. But I kind of know that this is an area for the discussion we're going to need post today. Abby.
So sorry to be late. Just suggesting that however we follow up on this, we note somewhere from this discussion that it seems to me that one, we need to consider language around the decoupling of thermal from electric. Two, we need to put in a specific action item around, and Alex is correct. I mean, probably we need to put in a specific action item around life cycle assessments, accounting, whatever the right LCA term is, around emissions for all of these different things. And also I put in the chat, it sounded to me from our brief meeting with Kaya the other day that the way that we might go through some of these equity screening pieces is to elevate things, a few specific things that we run through as a group. And maybe this is one of those things that we need to run through as a group with the equity screen. And it might be that at the end of that screen, that helps us clarify the language or helps us decide that, we can only recommend X. We're not comfortable moving forward with a different recommendation around biomass, et cetera, et cetera. Just
why don't we want to add the
wanting to make sure we don't lose anything that we've gained in conversation here, acknowledging we likely have to move on too.
Right.
But
Judy, any other further thoughts on this before we move on, just for the moment?
No, thank you.
Abby, thanks. We added that. I think those are all good kind of action items in a number of ways. So Marley added those, which is good.
Yeah, and Pat, I'm a little challenged as to what we want added here and what should just be in notes. So please, people, just don't hesitate to tell me to take something back out if I'm putting it in and you don't want it shared.
And Marley, the reason I think it's important to leave this in the spreadsheet is so the council can see that this is an issue that needs further debate, so we don't obscure the differences we need to talk through yet. Jake.
Yeah, just kind of, I posted in the chat, but I wanted to kind of present this to the group verbally too, is that, and Charlie in particular, I'd be interested to hear what you say about this. That, the notion of certification procurement standards may still be a very relevant and important recommendation for us to be making. Plus, we need to address some additional concerns regarding electric generation in terms of biomass. So it's like we need to add some recommendations that are separate from we can't squeeze everything into this procurement strategy. And so there's additional considerations for us to make, but that this procurement strategy still might be in and of itself very important broadly, as something we want to put forth.
And again, it sounds like some of this also bleeds a little bit into the cross-sector mitigation conversation too, that was highly related to your all's work. So there may be we need some cross discussion across them too. We're trying to add some, I think Molly's trying to add a few things in. Abby, do you have a final thought on this? I just want to move us on because of time, so we have a lot more to talk about.
oh no, sorry, residual hand.
Okay, so I think a lot more discussion to be had for both clarity and whether we have disagreement or not in the group, which I think is hard to tell at this point, but we'll note this for sure and yellow it. And Marley, could you use the crate certification thing? I think maybe just yellow that too, just so we know it's just part of the further conversation we're gonna have to have. Yeah, that's great. Okay, let's go down below. There was on 58, I wasn't sure, this Charlie goes back to the work you already did. There was this action old that I'm not sure we did anything with, that's in yellow. And I wasn't sure what we were supposed to do with that.
I think the thing in yellow is addressed in the actions that are highlighted in green, although like Billy, I'm straining a little bit to see the
I know it's hard
words. But yeah, the idea of dealing with the accounting programs, I think, is captured in the actions now. I mean, it addresses that.
So we can
addresses concerns around baseline establishment, accounting for additionality and potential leakage. So I think that that comment is now captured in the action, acknowledging that there are those specific things that need to be addressed through the development or exploration of these programs.
Good. So I think what we can do under action old is I think, Marley, we can just get rid of the yellow. I think it's, again, it's already under the column old action and we've got new actions replaced. So just either get rid of the colors, but the easiest thing to do, or leave it like that, however you want to do it. But I think we've got it tended to. Good. Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay, let's go down. There's another one a little further down in Peach. Go back up. There we go. So I think I want to just check to see if we can just add this one. Judy, I think you highlighted this one.
Yes.
And is that an action that we'd like to include in the current actions, correct?
Well, when we first started Green Up Day, there was all these businesses that used to give out little trees to people who went to their business. And I have two 45-year-old trees in my yard that my children got when McDonald's opened up. And it just seemed like if we could start some kind of program that ties up with Earth Day or something like that, if we had a fund for that, it might help get more trees in people's yards. There were only little, evergreens this big, but they're huge trees now. And it would get individual people involved with their yards. And I just thought it might be a good action.
Abby.
This might be a really cool way to tie in the conservation districts. They do spring plant sales already where they where they're trying to promote folks like buying plants that are local and planting them. And so maybe this could be a component of that, like a child component of that or something. So I would support adding it as an action. And if folks are open to it, would say that it might be something that could be tied into the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts.
So anybody disagree with adding it? Because I'm not sure there's any controversy. So does any have a concern adding it, and we'll add it into current actions?
Judy, would you be okay with it tying into the sales that they already do? I'm just thinking they're already getting those trees and they might be able to they already have a bit of a distribution network.
Yeah, I mean, I can see like a class, how they have places you go, they say, adopt this section of the highway. I could see like a group of people or a classroom where their kids do fundraising to get certain shrubs or whatever, osier, willow, whatever, to adopt a piece of a riparian. It just seems like a good project to get younger people involved in.
Folks want this here in increased tree coverage or with other educational items?
Maybe with other educational items. Although it works for increasing tree coverage too.
Yeah, both. So I think anybody disagree with including this as an action, the details to be worked out. Anybody disagree with this being included? John, nice point in chat there. Okay, so we're going to include this one in our current actions. We may have to work on the language a little bit. Okay. All right. So in pathway A, these are the ones that we highlighted so far for discussion. We had some changes earlier that we had agreed to. I'm sure it's not perfect, but is there anything else in this? And I'd like to move to pathway B if we could. Anything else here? There's still a number of comments we haven't fully addressed. We're going to have to in detail after today. All right, and again, we're kind of marching through as best we can. Let's go to pathway B, start at the top. Okay, so this, just to remember the pathway, it's adapt, sustain, restore, and enhance the health and function of Vermont's natural and working lands. So as we go down this, let's see. Okay, so Marley, can you make this, I know this is hard, get a chance to make this a little bit bigger.
May I just jump in here?
Yeah, of course.
Judy, is it okay? So Judy and I talked a little bit about the invasives, and I think some of what is happening is just a breakdown in our understanding of the words that different people are saying. And so, Judy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the issue that is coming up in regards to invasives management is to do with any words regarding eradication or the complete removal of introduced species versus the thoughtful and intentional management based on traditional ecological knowledge or permaculture methods such as fire and coppicing, like Judy added here. So I wondered if we could just update the language to include, for me personally, like, I know that I would prefer that we head towards those ways of managing introduced species versus pesticides, for example. And so I think maybe if we could make the language correct on it, we could move forward on this.
So Abby, do you have thoughts on how that yellowed thing there, how we should word it?
Incentivize and provide support.
So the concern that I have had through this whole discussion about invasive work versus introduced is that you asked me to share traditional ecological knowledge in the beginning, and I did. Now that we've come to push to the final push here, you're not considering it. And that's been the issue I've had with this. There are other ways than just eradicating specific plants. I mean, in the 1900s, when Canadian hawkweed came here, Victorian people were told to put salt on them because they were invasive and get rid of them. And now you can barely find a hawkweed plant. And so the issue becomes time, and the concept of time for most non-Indigenous people is very different than the concept for us. It takes decades and centuries for things to happen. And that concept has to be included when you're talking about managing these things, because eventually there will be balance.
And Judy, so I'm trying to think about to make sure that TEK is in here. I'm not sure what the wording fix is. I don't know whether it's incentivize and provide appropriate support for invasive species management efforts, including, and we could say including using traditional ecological knowledge, specifically where, what would be language that would make this better?
Well, that specifically fire and coppicing, because we have all this stuff in here about managing fire, and fire is our friend.
Right.
We should be using it to manage our forests, our roadways.
So let's try this. So Marley, if we did species management efforts rather than control, and then we said, then after efforts, we said, for instance, sort of use of fire, coppicing, and other methods. Parenthetical, then the rest of the sentence. Judy, does that help?
Yes, it does.
And the other folks, how does that look to you? So we can turn the yellow to white. All right. So if we make those changes, can we go ahead and consider this done and just include it with the other current actions? Any anybody have a concern about what we've got there? Whoops, we want it in black, right, Marley? Not red.
I'm just leaving things in red because I need to remember to go back to them and make final corrections, unless you
Okay.
want this just left the way it is.
I think, because
Um,
I think let's leave, red often meant strikeouts. Let's not leave it in red because I'm worried. If you want to leave it in bold, totally, but definitely leave it in black so it's not considered strikeout.
Judson flagged in the chat that perhaps we should not only have this relating to forests,
I agree with that, Judson.
which
Should we
I would agree with that.
We just strike the last parenthetical specifically.
Right. Yep.
Okay. So Marley, we just strike that last clause.
Last
Specifically-
clause. that whole
Specifically
thing?
where, yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. All right. Let's see. So I think just to be clear, the two things above, there was a question about this. This was some changes. I think, Charlie, you made a number of these changes, I think. And I think the only thing we want to look at is there was some language, Charlie, that you did here, new revised action, and there was a question about what that means. And is it equitable? So Charlie, you may want to describe the action. We'll see if there's questions about it.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure which action we're
What does
talking about.
pay for practice incentives mean?
New revised action. So to Judy's question, pay for practice is one way of thinking about incentive payments. A great example of that would be like the NRCS's EQIP program, which pays landowners money to support things that go towards enhancing wildlife habitat, forest health, reducing erosion on forest roads, those kinds of things. So it's essentially saying like, these are out-of-pocket expenses that we're going to help offset on your property to do things which benefit the objectives that we want. Does that make sense?
Out of whose pocket?
The landowner. So for example, if a forest landowner buys a property and there's a road system on there that's heavily degraded because the previous owner never closed out the roads correctly, that program offers funding to assist that landowner in going in and mitigating erosion on those roads. So the idea is that it supports things on private property to meet, you know, objectives around those things, which that landowner might not be able to afford outside of that.
And there's not any stipulation as to the size of the land.
No, the EQIP program, I'm using this as an example of what this would mean, but like the EQIP program, you can work with a property that's 5 acres or 5,000 acres. And I don't think we're directly saying here, like, we're not developing the program and the recommendation. We're just saying that we're looking at developing a program similar to that framework that would look at incentives around, you know, climate adaptive forest management practices.
And is it equitable to all?
I mean, that would be something that would have to be addressed in the development of the program itself. I think that the principle that's espoused here is kind of, I wouldn't say there's an equity consideration to it because we're not outlining the parameters of said program. I think when the program would be developed, that's when an equity screen would have to be applied to say, you know, are we doing this in a way that's appropriate? This recommendation is just saying that we'd like to develop a program that gets at this kind of mechanism to incentivize this work on private lands.
Okay, then the word equitable needs to be in there.
And Judy, I was wondering if we
Sure.
want to add something like accessible to all scales of landowners or all landowners or something. So it's to your point about equity, it's better just to put equity in there, develop an equitable program.
Yeah, I would put equitable.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Yep. And as Alyssa pointed out, like there are mechanisms to do this that we can look to. So like the NRCS program, as she pointed out, does have higher payment rates for new beginning farmers, underserved populations. So there are things we can look to.
Thank you.
Great. All right. So I think we can I think we can get rid of the yellow now and we can just leave the comment in there if we want, but let's just I think we can turn this into white.
Yeah, and then the last part of this was just, you know, I think that that conversation around state tax policy incentives that we had last time, you know, that's still captured here. It's not necessarily calling out any specific tax policy program, but that is retained here around exploration of that mechanism kind of, again, paired with the pay for incentive programs that are also listed here.
And remember, we, rather than sort of change state tax policy, or whatever, we added the word explore to try to address the concerns people had about current use. So I wonder if we're okay turning this one now to white, so to speak, which is acceptable to the group. Anybody have a concern if we turn it to white with the change, with adding equitable in and clarity about what it meant? Okay. All right, let's.
So go white, Pat, this one?
Yeah, I think go white. Yep, not hearing any. And I think on this overall recommendation, because it's got some revisions, we fixed the invasive species one. I think, is there any concerns with changing this strategy now would be promote and incentivize climate adaptation forest management practices, and then the changes that we made. Anybody have a concern about that?
My only thing is just a word choice here. And instead of saying, I'm happy to, if Ally wants to comment on this too, but I would maybe phrase it climate adaptive forest management practices. It's a super small thing, but I think that would mirror better the language that's used elsewhere in this kind of work.
And I also just note a point, go down to Charlie's last change to at the bottom there. There's one other thought in chat I just want to say we might want to address too. Could we say a pay for practice or outcomes? Charlie, it gets to the PS kind of idea that you can pay for practices, or in some cases you actually pay for outcomes, and then you use whatever practices you want to achieve them. Could we say develop an equitable program of pay for practice or outcome incentives?
Well, I mean, the payment is based on the outcome of the practice. And in order to have a functional program that you can actually check, there has to be a list of actual practices that they will pay for. But again, the payment is based on the outcome. So if the practice does not achieve the outcome, the payment would not be made.
Right. I think it's just the notion that in chat, the point is, where we can, even though practices and outcomes get confused, like PS, right, is trying to pay for outcomes, not necessarily pay for practices. So I think the point in chat is, we could consider programs that pay for outcomes, of which people then choose the practices to get to them versus.
Sorry, can I just read the chat real quick? Because I'm
go for it. It's
reading this and it's like there's just a lot happening.
Yeah. And Alyssa has a point too. So Charlie, go ahead and read that. Take a minute. No problem. Throwing a lot at you.
So I guess I don't understand what Zach is getting at about rewarding landowners who are past bad actors. I mean, the way these programs are set up, if you go out and trash your forest roads, they don't pay you to fix them. This is like if you purchase a property that had things that were previously done to it, then that's where they come in and help. So, I guess I understand what he's getting at, but
let me go. Alyssa's got a thought in here. Alyssa, jump right in.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, I noticed Zach's comment and that it's kind of changing our conversation. I just wanted to reiterate that there are many instances where outcomes-based programs end up rewarding bad actors too. And so there's not really a correlation between practice versus outcome-based programs rewarding certain types of people or folks that have been dragging their feet on conservation. I think practice-based programs make a lot of sense for folks because the cost share kind of matches the cost of implementation. And so I think they have different roles to play. And that's all. I think the way that it's written is great.
Yeah, I think let's leave it as, I think we're going to leave it as is for now, and so we can move on. Totally good. All right, so Marley, I think we've got, some of those strikeout changes, maybe we can move over to actions old or something just for cleanup, but we can, like those things there, but we can worry about that later.
I can clean up later. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Go down to 105. There's a question about, this is a strategy around increased funding for lake pond mitigation and adaptation efforts. And then we've got something about supporting continued conversion of old combined sewer systems. And then we've got a concern about stop dumping in rivers and lakes. So we just need to talk about this one.
My concerns is every time we get a heavy rain, that the wastewater treatment facilities are dumping into the rivers and lakes. And I don't think that's something we should work to limit happening. I think it's something we should stop in its tracks from happening. In the 70s, when they built all these wastewater treatment facilities, they placed them next to projects in low income housing because those were the people who didn't complain. And now they have turds flowing up on their front lawns when wastewater treatment facilities are dumped.
So, so I just want to check. So this, what would be so this is trying to get older plants to deal with CSOs, combined sewer overflow, hopefully. So what just described here doesn't happen. I think you're also making the larger point about where we continue to build and support these things as well. Abby?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've been talking to our town manager about some of these things. I'm wondering if, I know for one that I'm guessing that there is, yeah, John is making the exact comment I'm about to make, is that there's never enough money for municipalities to do these things. I'm wondering if we need to write in a recommendation, something about like ARPA funds. I'm guessing this will come up in rural resilience and adaptation as well at the municipal level. And so maybe this is one of those kind of cross-cutting issues where we need to make the point that, you know, our wastewater infrastructure has to be dealt with for us to be resilient and adaptive in the face of a changing climate. And these continued infractions cannot continue. We have to fix this. That it's like a top level issue, because I think my understanding is that it really is, and that it's a very statewide issue.
There's lack of funding, lack of enforcement, I heard. Is that right, Abby? Okay.
Yes,
and
sorry.
Okay. David Mears.
I'm struggling a little bit about why this is a priority for the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee to the Climate Council.
Yeah, this really
help you understand that it's not that it's not an important issue, or it
has to do with water. Has to do with water quality and management of our water resources.
So what I'm going to suggest is there's also there may be a rural resilience link, and we have not had a full time to work with them to figure out kind of what goes where. So maybe we just we know the link to the rural resilience group. David, to your point.
It also has to do with equity, because as I said, a lot of these older ones were built in the 70s right next to low income and project housing. And those people do not have an equal voice in what happens in their community. And it's really problematic for these people when they dump. When they dump the overflow.
Again, I understand that relates to water and equity, and I agree it's an important environmental issue. I am really struggling though to understand the connection to the Ag and Ecosystems work. How is this connected? And you can make connections to climate in that there's an increased rainfall events that may contribute to increase in sewer overflows. But it seems a little attenuated to me in terms of why we would put this as a priority recommendation.
What the health of people is part of ecosystems. And if you have all this crap flowing up in your yard, that impacts the health of people, the health of water. What about the ecosystems within the riverbeds, that this is all flowing down before it even gets to the lake?
Again, here's my suggestion. David, fair point. There are some things like this we are going to have to sort out between the jurisdictions of the subcommittees. But I'd like to add, if we could add in the word equity, Marley, to this as well. And also note kind of impact on watershed ecosystems, which I think Iris noted. And watershed and aquatic ecosystems, add aquatic in there too. Sorry about that. Thank you. And then let's highlight it in yellow and move on, because I did what it's going to need. We're not going to solve it today, I don't think, but it's important to note those points because we got to come back to them. Okay, great. All right. Then there is there was eliminate septic leakage from shoreline development. David, you may raise the same question, whether that's specifically related to our work, but and there was a comment about, should this be under ag and eco, because all this is going into the lake. So I just wasn't sure how we should address that comment.
Well, it's the same thing. If you paddle along the cliffs of the islands, you'll see the sewage leaking right out of the rocks. because they have old septic tanks. They don't have those big high leach fields. And they're just, it's all just leaking right out of the rocks into the lake.
So we might, I wonder if we want to add something that says eliminate, but the reason it doesn't say why, which is eliminate septic leakage from shoreline development in order to protect aquatic systems. Or natural systems, whatever the right words are. David.
I'll just say the same thing again, maybe in different words, and then just lodge it as a concern as we go forward, and then the group can figure out how to address my concern or just ignore it. But this is not the Clean Water, Solutions Act. This is the Global Warming Solutions Act, and the septic systems and combined sewer overflows are important issues that relate to localized impacts of pollution. They're not dealing with even really large-scale impacts into water quality, and they're certainly not dealing with the issues of climate change or the way that climate change is impacting our state. So I just think these do not belong in this set of recommendations.
So I wonder for now, I think we turn this to yellow. We note the concern because I think there's a number of things like that, and this is not the only one where we're going to have to come back to decide whether it really fits or not. I think having that debate right now, we won't get to an answer, and only because of getting the matrix done for today is why I'm trying to have us move on. But I just note the concern, and we'll leave it in yellow because we're not done with that. There was another one which I think is an easy change. Judy, I wonder if we just change tribal members, say to include Native peoples, TEK, youth and resource management planning. Does that help?
Yes.
That's what it says, include Native peoples and get rid of tribal members specifically.
Right, because the state recognized the four tribes, and as generic, many Native people have not joined the four tribes. So there are a lot of indigenous people in the state that do not belong to those tribes.
Oh, that's nice.
Accurate, and should it be capitalized in this way? Is this accurate?
Is Native people capitalized?
Native peoples, is that the correct term, and should it be capitalized?
I always capitalize Native, not so much peoples, but you can do it however you want. I'm not.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. The next one down was let's see, was this large landowners? I wasn't sure what that was. Just, do we need to just add the words large landowners to this?
Well, yeah, that's what I was questioning. Develop and climate fund adaptation planning and training for all farmers, foresters, and large landowners.
Gotcha. So we just add and large landowners. Good. Anybody ever get adding large landowners to this?
I would just say add landowners, maybe. Going
Yeah.
to qualify, because we're adding like a different class, right? Like owners and managers. But I agree with Judy putting in landowners. So.
Yeah, I was just curious about the demarcation of scale. I think we'd want to reach all managers, owners, or operators to be successful, and emphasize one over the other.
Perfect.
Not sure.
Thank you.
Right place and actions.
So for this invasive species one, I think we worked on language above. These are slightly sensitive to ecologically sensitive areas. So I think if we can just copy the language from above into here, I think that will address the issues we've had in the past. So the language we just worked on a little bit ago. Is that okay? And Marley can copy that in a little bit.
Basically, it's used TEK.
Yep, exactly. Okay. All right, so there is, I think the thought is, Marley, in terms of what's now lined, not on the spreadsheet, but on the number that the number is like 135. I think we just add educate, support plant nurseries and educate them about use of these plants. I think we just add language there, I think is the intent. Does that address the point there?
Yes, I want to give you an example of that. Traditionally, when we made red osier baskets, we made two. and one we used and one we planted as a thank you to the land, because then the one we planted grew. And I think that's the kind of stuff people have to understand, how important it is to have things like red osier on the edges of the river.
All right, so then the question, Billy, I totally good for public comment. I wonder if we can, Billy, should we pause now and do public comment, then go to these next?
Yeah, I think we're more or less at 10. So if there's one more thing we want to wrap up, great. Otherwise, we should pause and take some comment, then resume.
These next things may bear more discussion. I'm not sure how much discussion we'll have, so maybe we should pause now. Go ahead.
Okay, that sounds good. Great. So we're going to take a little pause from this work. Thanks for the committee members' engagement so far. I think we're making good progress and working through some good issues. So thanks for that. Now we'll take some time to hear from any members of the public who are joining us who would like to share their thoughts or comments at this time, understanding there'll be another opportunity near the end of the meeting. So anyone who's interested in speaking, please raise your Zoom hand or otherwise identify yourself. See Zach, see if anyone else pops up. Scott. Okay, let's go with Zach, then Scott, and just take a few minutes each, please, and share your thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks, Billy. Good morning, everybody. Zach Porter, Lake Champlain Lakekeeper at Conservation Law Foundation. Just had a couple of comments to share. One is that there at the outset of the meeting, there was a little bit of conversation about the kind of ecosystem management, forest focus management, stakeholder meetings that were held earlier this week. And I just wanted to say that I was impressed with the folks who turned out to both of those meetings. And I was also very impressed by the number of landowners who were present at the Monday meeting who really wanted to see changes in UVA to allow wildlands focused management. And so I just wanted to register that because there was a lot of interest on the part of the folks who turned out to that meeting, wanting to make sure that you know, we make UVA more equitable and open to all Vermonters who are otherwise eligible for enrollment based on acreage and other qualifications. So just wanted to add that kind of reflection on the Monday meeting. And then just regarding the conversation that was going on a second ago about water quality, I really want to thank Judy for her comments there too. The Global Warming Solutions Act requires action on climate resilience and mitigation in addition to emissions reduction. And we all know that because we've been working on those things, you all have, for the last several months. So to me, dealing with things like the impacts of you know, combined sewer overflows and other you know, sources of water pollution is critical because those things are being exacerbated by climate change. And as a way to get ahead of you know, our changing precipitation and you know, significant weather events, it's perfectly reasonable for this committee to be making recommendations that will protect aquatic health and human health by preserving water quality and enhancing water quality. So I see a direct connection there, and I think that you know, well, I hope that this group will make a recommendation, and if the Rural Resilience Subcommittee makes a recommendation, you know, on those topics as well, all the better, because it just shows the synergy between these two subcommittees on those issues, which are just critical. So I certainly hope that will remain in the in consideration by the committee. Lastly, I just want to say, you know, there was a conversation about offsets this morning, and I'm not here to weigh in one way or another on the validity of offsets. I think there's a lot of kind of conflicting science around how effective they are or how justifiable they are from an equity perspective, and whether they really help us get to the emissions reductions that we need. But all of that aside, I don't think we should be making recommendations related to offsets if we aren't looking at making recommendations specific to a wildlands category in UVA, and one that permits forever wild easements into the use value appraisal program, because of you know, just how effective, you know, such management is for carbon storage. So if we are going down the path of opening up a world of carbon offset markets in Vermont, again, we should also be making sure that there are kind of more tools available to Vermont landowners who want to participate and not just limit it to people who want to log their forests. So just a few comments there, and I appreciate the conversation this morning. Thank you.
Billy, could we, Charlie did have one thought. So I wonder if it's, Billy, is it okay if Charlie just makes one remark? Is that okay?
Sure.
Charlie, go for it.
No, I was just because I think we are making those recommendations, and I think we're going to get there. So I guess I would just say, hold your fire, Zach, and you'll see what we come up with, and then you can respond to the changes we've made.
Right.
Thanks, Charlie.
And Scott, a couple minutes to share your thoughts.
Hi, everyone. This is Scott Sanderson from CLF also. Thanks again for all the hard work and for the extra hours this week. I see that pathway A of the matrix includes the actions, update state of Vermont emissions inventory to include net emissions to account for sequestration of carbon in agricultural soils, and that it also references AFM's write-up. I'm mainly curious about what this action is actually recommending. If it's recommending that the emissions inventory track and report net emissions and carbon sinks, particularly relating to our agricultural lands, then I think the action makes a ton of sense. Like I commented on Wednesday, farmers are already playing a critical role in solving Vermont's climate challenges, and they deserve Vermont's support and recognition as they continue to do so. And I think understanding how farms both are reducing their emissions and increasing sequestration is part of this. In fact, the Science and Data Subcommittee has already made a similar recommendation. However, if this action effectively recommends amending the emissions inventory so that Vermont's progress towards the GWSA's Section 3 targets incorporates selective net emissions accounting, then I think the recommendation directly contradicts a careful choice that the General Assembly made when it passed the GWSA. Like I mentioned on Wednesday, the definition that describes the term emissions as it's used in Section 3 of the GWSA describes the release of air contaminants, including GHGs. And that definition doesn't encompass the removal of GHGs from the atmosphere through sequestration. I think the General Assembly knew this when it passed the GWSA, and it means that the Assembly set gross targets. This makes a ton of sense to me, especially when you look at the GWSA as a whole. Not only does Section 3 aim to reduce Vermont's gross emissions by 80% by 2050, as measured by the inventory, but also Section 4 aims for net zero emissions by the same year. Getting from 80 gross to net zero requires sequestration, and our farms will play a critical role in getting us, basically in getting us there. So I think it makes sense to track sequestration. It'll help us understand whether we're approaching net zero, and it helps us make good choices with respect to our working lands. But rolling sequestration into any sector's contribution to Vermont's progress towards Section 3's gross targets undermines those targets, and it fundamentally changes them. I think this means that the subcommittee should make it very clear that this recommendation does not advocate throwing away the emissions targets that the GWSA set, but that it advocates gathering information that'll help us support our farming communities and credit them for their contribution. So thanks so much. That's my comment.
Thank you. All right,
Thanks,
any other comments? Okay. All right, so here's the thought. We're going to keep cranking, and we'll try to give everyone a break at 10:45 if you can stand to go that long. So why don't we go back? Marley, do we have you back? So there was a few things here. Let's go to the reduce. I think it's like a 130 ID 136. Okay, here we go. So there's a few things here. There's reduce roadside mowing, minimize lawn mowing, and there was a lot of comment about whether these belong here or not in terms of climate activities. I don't know that there's disagreement with the idea, but whether they fit here. So they're yellowed because there was a fair number of comments about whether these are appropriate for this activity. So what do you think? Gets to a point David was making earlier for some other things.
That was a great discussion in our committee as well. And people were concerned about safety for not cutting, but they were also concerned about not cutting for the purpose of carbon storage. And as somebody mentioned earlier, it's just not forests that are storing the carbon.
So Judy, do you think these should be left in or taken out, or what should we do with them?
Well, I think it should have a few more words than reduce mowing for multiple benefits. I think it should, talk about for multiple benefits, but also have some concern about safety for drivers as well.
David, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I support leaving this in. I think this one directly relates to our charge. It relates to the investment in ecological systems as a way of storing, sequestering carbon. And it has lots of benefits. So I think that it should stay in. And I agree with the point about it doesn't say eliminate roadside mowing. So I think there's ways to, capture this in a way that reflects the need of the state, road system managers to manage the roads in a way that protects safety, but also reduces the amount of just, unused, grass space that really doesn't have any ecological function, and it's a huge missed opportunity for carbon storage and sequestration.
Great. So,
I would suggest we move on. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement with these. We're going to do a prioritization exercise in the future. These may not sugar out in that work, but as far as like substantive disagreement, I don't know that there's concern. So we should probably move on.
that sounds good to me. Let's unyellow them and the one below it, which is lawn, sort of individual lawns. And let's jump to two other issues we talked about briefly last time, which are, we'll figure out what to do with. Okay, so the next two office issues were, there was back and forth about whether or not to have a state central planning office and whether or not to create a kind of interagency or new agency for climate or just continue the climate council. So we can just leave it in yellow, move on for now because we may not resolve it today. Maybe this is really more of an issue for the climate council as a whole, but this idea of a state central planning office, what do you want to do with this recommendation?
And I just want to add, Pat, that also applies to number 144, which talks about a state land use plan through the state planning office. So I just want to make sure that that one is also flagged in yellow, Marley, if you don't mind.
Good point. That's one. You're right. Thank you. That's like two above, I think, Marley.
Yeah.
So do we just leave them in yellow for now and move on because we don't have agreement? Do we do something else with them in the time we have? We've already kind of talked about them, so we can get to stuff we haven't. Maybe it's better just leave them in yellow and move on. What do people think? I'm
fine with leaving them in yellow and moving on. I was one of the people that had concerns about it, but can defer to others. As long as, we figure it out later, fine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is more homework. We're not done there. Okay. So for pathway B, this was, that's the only other things that we identified specifically. There's probably things in the comments we've not talked about. We'll need to in the future. Anything else in pathway B before we go to pathway C?
Yeah, just that number 151 also talks about the climate office and that sort of stuff. So it gets pulled into that broader conversation. There you go. Thanks, Marley.
Yep, good. Thank you. That's good. Thanks for catching up. Okay. All right, pathway C. Yes, this is support and empower Vermont forest and land workers to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from their operations. We already worked on some language in the, let's see, oops, let's talk in the top. Let's go to the top here. We are, we'd already did a lot of good work around the renewable energy stuff. We developed that language last time around solar, for instance. We fixed some language around biomass that we had a good conversation about. So that's in there. So most of these are things we'd already talked about and fixed. There was one question about lakes and ponds towards the bottom there, I think, Marley. Yeah. And there was a question about headwaters. So it says, especially on lake tributaries and especially on lakes with TMDLs or increasing peak concentrations. And the thought would be to add headwaters to that list of water bodies. Jake.
Yeah, so I noticed there's in green, there's an action, collect data regarding on-farm energy generation to establish baseline. So there is data on this. There is an energy atlas that EAN is part of kind of their network and they maintain. So I can't speak to the full sort of accuracy of that, but I recently exported energy information on on-farm solar, which includes also accounting for rooftop and land-based installations. So I can happy to sort of share that or just raise that as something that we may sort of have a system in place that accounts for that action. So
Jake, do you want to leave it? Do you want to make a modification to the language? What would you suggest?
Well, I see it. I'm curious what Alex has to say about that. Yeah.
Alex, over to you.
Yeah, so that's a great point. Just this baseline that's mentioned here can mean a lot of things. And depending on what's needed, whether you need acres of solar on primary agricultural rated soils, or you need locations of how many acres of what size categories, I'm not sure what we need here, but I'm just going to say, like with Jake, we can get stuff and I can help. So we sort of have this already, but I'm not sure what exactly is meant. So I think it's fine to just leave it, but just so people know, yeah, we could dig into this.
So is it okay to kind of leave it as is for now? And we can obviously.
I think so. Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's sort of one of those things of like, maybe it's sort of more of a directive to, annually sort of report that information, or sort of take the time to publish what the baseline is from the existing database.
Okay, Judy.
Yes, number 51, I think it was, or 52. That's the example I was talking about. So when they were talking about existing or planned biomass, I don't recall agreeing to this, and I don't think that should be green.
Let's go down. That's Judy. That's line 52. All right. It's the one specific to biomass. There's several 52, but it's the biomass ones. Let's go down to that.
Can we just finish on this one first? Do you want to add the word sharing? Because I heard that collective sharing data. Do you want that in there or not?
Yep, let's add it unless somebody has a concern.
All right.
Again, let's go down, Judy, to 52. And it's there. It's the biomass one. So I thought we'd worked on this language last time, but I may have gotten it wrong. So let's talk about whether we should fix it.
This is what I was talking about on the previous pathway. When I said there was one in here about planned biomass generation facilities. We can't have any planned biomass until we solve the problems with the one we got.
So Judy, I think you'd rather, and one thing we do is just make this one in yellow for now, for sure. I don't know if there's other thoughts about how to fix the language to make it, acceptable at this point. And Charlie, I don't know about I think it's not about it's about the plan question, like ones that aren't yet there. And Judy's no more.
And I think again, the issue here is just around the words biomass generation facilities and what it brings to mind for people. I mean, this is looking at, not just more McNeil plants. It's looking at, I go back to the project at Allard Lumber where they've put in a centralized unit there to use residues and low-grade wood to both heat facilities for drying wood and produce power, so they're not relying on diesel generators and stuff. So I understand what's being said. I just want to flag that I think that as we think about this, we need to understand that when we talk about biomass generation facilities, it's a spectrum, I guess.
Well, see, and that's what I want to have more discussion on, because just saying that sounds like a sales pitch from a used car dealer. It doesn't, I need to know more. I need to understand what you're saying, Charlie.
Let me go to Jake, and I have a suggestion to move us on from this one for now, because I think biomass is going to be a continued discussion here. Jake.
Oh, sorry, this is a residual hand. So I'll put it down.
So I suggest for now we just turn this yellow. We've also got biomass elsewhere in yellow because we just know we have to talk more. So I think we do that and move on for now. Judy, that okay?
That's fine. Thank you.
Thanks for catching that. Well, let's go to the bottom. There's one around, right? Can we add headwaters to these other named water bodies or areas? Anybody have a concern about adding the thing that Marley just did?
I don't have a concern about headwaters. I'm just wondering about particularly calling out phosphorus when, depending on where you are in the state, phosphorus is not the problematic nutrient, and whether we just want to say something around balanced nutrient levels or nutrient management or something.
How about that? We just call it nutrient concentration. Could be nitrogen in Connecticut River Valley, could be phosphorus in Champlain. So, okay, good. All right, good. All right, anything, I think we can, anything else on this one? And then we've taken care of that one, so we can get rid of the action hold because we fixed it. Okay, let's go to pathway D.
Hey, I have a question / comment, Pat. D and E are both have pretty short amount of things, and I don't know that there's a lot of discussion. We may want to just kind of leave those in with the comments that are there and move to F, because there's a lot of substantial issues there. And then if we have time to come back to the other pathways, that will work. But F is, I think, where we have the most to discuss as a group at this point.
Jake, Billy, I think that's a great suggestion. So let's, if that's okay, let's do it. Let's jump to F. I think that's a great idea.
I'm agreeing with what Billy's saying. I just wanted to comment that in looking at D&E, there's some things that I want to spend some more time with. I have to acknowledge that, being on leave, I missed some process, and there's some things that I can help with D&E, kind of specifically tied to actions and strategy. So I hope to do that during sometime next week, is to put a little more time and effort into those. So just wanted to note that.
You
Is
bet.
there
And
anything I should highlight in yellow here?
I think not for now, Jake, right? We just note that Jake's gonna do something.
Yeah, I just think there's some work that needs to be done. So I can help move some of that forward.
Okay, let's go to F. So
Hang
Alex,
on,
do you have a
this
quick
is Alex, just a minute. Pat, I did have some comments on C, but I'd be glad to table them. Basically, what I'm reading in C in the comments and so forth is that there's some issues with solar, and I do understand those. And then there's the idea of maybe lifting up other types of on-farm renewable energy that don't have as much of a footprint. And so that's important, digesters and wind. So there's a couple things we could do there to tweak the recommendations. If people are in fact talking about increasing incentives or rejiggering the payments on these things to better compensate types of energy on farms that are in alignment with the subcommittee's goals here. So there's some real things you can do, and I guess I'll just work internally to see how to incorporate those on C. Nothing that needs to go in yellow. Glad to move on. I just wanted to say that there's some pretty cool stuff we could do here in alignment with some of the comments that were made about really good on-farm energy.
good. And so we'll note about kind of the non-solar renewable stuff we may need a further discussion on for those sections for sure. It's great. Thanks, Alex. Okay, so pathway F. All right, so the first thing, okay, so thank you, Marley. All right, so we tried to address this language in terms of rewriting it around reducing regulation of development in downtown villages to cluster development. However, Judy has raised and others have raised the concern about cluster development being in floodplains, which means actually incentivizing that may not be a great idea in particular areas. So I think we need to figure out what we do with recommendation, which in green may not be the right color, and this question of clustering in floodplains.
Exactly. I mean, I totally agree with clustering. I mean, that's not a problem, but what good is it going to do to cluster housing in the middle of a village that's going to flood away again?
Marley just added, and encourage development away from floodways. I don't know whether that helps. I don't know whether you want to dare say anything about, managed retreat for those places that don't make sense to stay.
Like Montpelier, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm not saying that, but you could say that, sure.
Just asking.
Totally fair question. I'll keep it generic. Good question.
I would like to say too, I have an understanding that as the river meanders, the floodways are the straight lines on either side, and that there's a distinct difference between floodway and floodplains, and that there's zero building in, according to FEMA, in floodways. That's my understanding. Is that everybody else's understanding? Because what's happening, and maybe what we should address, is local towns should not be permitting building in floodways.
Can someone actually just quickly, and Lauren, I don't know if you know the difference between floodways and floodplains. Maybe you can cover there and you have your hand up too, so go for it.
Yeah, well, without getting too much in the weeds, thanks, Judy. Appreciate the comment. And that speaks to the recorders conversation we had before. Floodways is a FEMA term. I don't think it's necessarily the term that we would want to use here. Floodplains and floodways are different, but they're just different levels of flood damage as FEMA measures them. But FEMA only accounts for flooding on the y-axis, so inundation flooding, the slow rise and the slow fall. The majority of Vermont's flood damage actually comes from fluvial erosion, which is when, as you described, Judy, a meandered river hops its banks and cuts a new course entirely. And that area of where a river can move on, again, the x-axis that's called the river corridor. And that's something that FEMA does not take into account in their in all of their mapping and their insurance programs, et cetera, which is why it's a huge gap in Vermont and other topographically challenged states.
Which is why Montpelier got no insurance from FEMA for 302 buildings.
Well, for a lot of reasons, but FEMA is not necessarily the easiest federal agency to navigate either. And yeah, big problems with the flood insurance program for sure, Judy.
Lauren, do you have thoughts about this recommendation, how we could address this question of kind of, reoccurrent flooding? So we cluster, which is great, but we may not want to cluster everywhere.
I would just say instead of from greenfields and floodways, I would say river corridors.
Okay.
Those are the most hazardous areas to locate infrastructure or buildings.
Does that make that one then usable for us? If we add that and river corridors?
Judy, are you okay with that? Do you understand the difference?
Wait, I want to read the whole sentence because what's happening is locals are permitting the building in river corridors.
Yeah, and we have a previous recommendation that Lawrence offered to expand state regulation over those areas so that I believe the intent is to dissuade municipalities from allowing that sort of development in the future.
Well, and I don't want to dissuade it. I want to stop it because as taxpayers, we keep paying for them to rebuild in a place where they shouldn't be rebuilding. That's my
Judy,
point.
I'm happy to also walk through the recommendation that I made around the other the flood hazard area and river corridor rule with you. But you're basically saying exactly what I'm hoping to accomplish with tweaking the existing rule.
Okay.
Lauren, which is
so should this be yellow?
Yeah, I think for now let's put yellow. It's tied to this other recommendation I want to get to that that Lauren just said. Lauren, is your recommendation we talked about earlier in pathway F?
It is, yeah.
Okay, so when you see it, let us know so we get to it. And then we struck incentive mandate clustering for new subdivisions, partly to the concern about kind of where to put things. So I think that one's good. We'll leave that for now. There's a question about increased subsidies for water and wastewater flows in downtown and village centers, which I think is the thought to improve them. However, some of them may be located in terrible places. So how do you want to handle what looks like 19 on the Excel line there? And we could just call it yellow for now and move on.
These places are not going to move in the short term. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't want to improve the infrastructure. If this group is so focused on water quality, this seems like a no-brainer.
Dave Mears.
I think the alternative to encouraging people to live in not necessarily compact settlement, but in more walkable and livable communities is the alternative to that is to push out into the hills and to the fields and to develop the farms and forests that we're trying to protect. So these two things go together. We can't short of passing a new law that says that no more people can live in Vermont, we have to figure out where people are going to live. And it makes so much more sense that people live in areas that are already developed, where we can manage and help them live safely, than it does to push them out into the hills where they're harming, eliminating some of the most important resources we have in the state in terms of our climate adaptation and mitigation resources.
I don't know if I agree with that, David. Look at Brandon. If they move, I don't know, 1,000 yards up the hill, their village, they're going to be still surrounding their green, their village green, but they're going to be out of the floodway. They just need to slide their village, 1,000 feet up the hill. So as a building washes away, don't replace it, just move it up the hill.
So on this one, what we can do is just highlight it in yellow for now. We can leave it. What do you all want to do?
Well, I still think they should move them off the river. And I know Billy said they're not going to do it. We're not that, we're working short term, but I think we should be looking long term, as we have with many of the other things. And I think it should be a recommendation looking long term to move them off the rivers and the lake. Some are directly on the lake.
So let's note this, because there's probably a further discussion about stay or go, quote unquote, that we probably not fully had as a subcommittee. So let's leave it in yellow for now. And then we'll have to, there's some rich discussion we'll have to have. Okay, the next one I think is Charlie. I think this was the one, Marley, if I'm right, this is the one that Charlie worked on yesterday. Is that right?
Yeah, that looks correct, Pat.
Charlie, you may want to explain what you did, and then we can talk about it. So this is new language from Charlie's work yesterday.
So I tried to incorporate kind of all the points of conversation that came up at the high level, changing the strategy from just increasing the pace of conservation to meet 30 by 30 targets, to re-articulate that, pointing to Vermont conservation design as a guiding plan for prioritization efforts. 30 by 30 is a big idea that everyone can rally under, but it lacks kind of, what does that mean on the ground here in Vermont? And so hopefully using VCD as a mechanism for how that plays out here articulates that better. Then when you get down to the actions, these are in a little bit different order here, I think, than I had written them out. We can go through them in the order here, that's fine. The state policy of no, you can scroll back up. Thanks, Marley. Adopt a state policy of no net loss of natural and working lands. So this was modified from the no loss of forest cover. What we tried to do here was incorporate all natural and working lands in this, kind of accounting for the fact that there are transitions between those kinds of things, thinking about like increasing forest buffers on ag land or how things work there, but kind of not just saying, no net loss of forests. As far as the current use program goes, so what I tried to do here is break it out into 3 different actions. And just from a formatting stance, the second ones here are not necessarily sub actions of the first. It's more just 3 different tracks that can be taken as far as current use goes. So the first one basically looks at using kind of existing structures within the current use program to allow for the enrollment of passively managed lands to get to old forest conditions. The second action here, which was just highlighted, is regarding the permanence issue and easements. One of the things with current use is not permanent. And so if we're going to be using current use to achieve old forest conditions, there's probably a need to incorporate a mechanism there to ensure permanence. So, exploring more the consideration or encouraging easements on these lands to kind of dovetail with this. And then the last one is kind of getting at that kind of higher level, change to the current use program, creating a brand new category which essentially mirrors the open space designation that we see in other states. So the way they're kind of ordered here, what I tried to do is kind of capture each track we can take, separate them out by essentially how much of a change it would be to the program, where existing consensus is kind of developing at least around some actions, but still kind of keeping the big picture aspirational things that we talked about there, acknowledging that they are critically important and we need to keep working towards what that would look like and how we do it. So that was the attempt here with current use, was to kind of, again, break out those things into 3 separate actions that look at kind of the scale of change, the kind of potential for immediacy of those actions, and get at some of the questions around, you know, the actual outcome on the land and the permanence of that outcome as it gets to achieving old forest conditions. What is not addressed here are some of the equity things. You know, it was brought up that there are equity issues around who can enroll certain kinds of land and who can't. There's equity issues around easements and who is going to pay for them, steward them, and how that works into like how we can get easements on those lands, where do they come from? So, you know, I just want to flag that there's issues embedded in there, you know, without creating a 10-page document kind of articulating that. I don't know how we can address it other than, as we have in other places, just flagging that equity considerations need to be taken into account.
So Charlie, thanks for the good work on this. So questions, comments from the subcommittee. There's a question from Judy about we have had a loss in forest over the last couple of years. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. No, we have seen a loss of forest cover. Yeah.
So anybody have questions about these? Did these look okay with as amended? What do people think?
Charlie, I'm happy to put this as 3 separate actions if you'd prefer it that way. You had said
Yeah, I think
action, so since I didn't know what the heck to do with a sub action, I just left it in it as you worded it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And I probably articulated that wrong, because what I want to try to make sure is that we're not essentially creating a value ranking of these. I think that they're all kind of, you know, equally important as actions. And so maybe just separating them out as individual actions so that they're not kind of, you know, couched in one or another, or, you know, directly tied as a next step to one of them.
There's a, Jane, you had a question about in a section that speaks to amount of acreage conserved per year. I'm not sure what the point is, Jane. So do you want to, what's the concern?
I was just curious. I remember noting this in the presentation at the stakeholder meetings this week, if there was an acreage target for the amount you were trying to conserve per year. And I remember what was being, I'm not for it or against it, but just wondering if it was a typo, knowing what the context is currently.
I don't think there was an acreage target per se, but there is language in here. And again, I don't know where it is in the spreadsheet, but there was existing action that said conserve and protect old forests. And then there was some amendments to that got at it. So I don't know if that's in this tab. If we can scroll to that one, because that also gets at the old forest questions as far as targets go.
Judson, can you search for that while I'm in here? The old forest.
I'm not sure where that is. Yeah.
Judson can probably find it quicker.
Yeah, there was, I saw something not about that. I remembered something in the presentation around like conserving. I thought I saw something that said 50,000-ish acres per year. I'll look at the presentation while you guys keep going from earlier this week and see if I can find it.
So the old forest language was under that same strategy of increasing the pace of permanent conservation towards 30-30 targets.
And maybe that got, I don't know whether that got lost or got written over. I'm not sure where that number, but where that came
here.
I do just want to back. I have some. I think I remember seeing something about that too. Maybe it wasn't specifically in forest land. Maybe it was 50,000 acres of conserved land broadly or something. But I do, Jane, I agree that there was somewhere that we called out, and or I think potentially like that's a missing action that we have is like a targeted, you know, acre target for each. You know, for 2025, 2030, and 2050. It might be an action that's still missing somewhere.
So I think Judson's pointing out row 61 and 65 might be where some of this is housed.
Yeah, and that's around Act 2. That was Act 250 stuff.
Not row ID.
He meant the
He's in the master, maybe.
the ID number, right? And for some reason in 61, I don't see any numbers. Yeah, I don't see any actual numbers. So, you know what, I don't want to get too lost in that right now. So I think we want to focus on Charlie's general recommendations and see what people think. John Roberts.
Well, I mean, I can just say it and we can find the text later to actually read it, but
let's just note that for now, maybe, but John, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that, you know, the land trust so far has conserved over 600,000 acres, the bulk of which is forest land. But, you know, and they are by far the biggest conservation group in the state, in the country, actually, in many ways. But they're, you know, so the numbers, it is quite a significant number of acres every year.
So, so I want to again, so Charlie is, I think the kind of notion about adopt a state policy of no net loss and aspiration for net gain across various kinds of natural lands and working lands, as we talked about last time, and I assume that's probably pretty good. But the one that's important to look at is the value appraisal program, the UVA, and whether people, this is, you know, often a controversial topic. So are people okay with that? Do they have questions? Can we turn it to kind of white or green, or we leave it yellow for now?
I have a couple of concerns on the side. Again, it's adding the TEK into it that manages the forest land with fire and coppicing, and create a fund to purchase. Oops, you went.
Go down a little bit. There we go.
Create a fund to purchase land to avoid fragmentation. I thought maybe that could be an action.
I wonder whether there's a few funding ones, whether we actually mentioned fragmentation explicitly in some of the funding ones that look like they're at like ID 69 and 70. So where we could just add, you know, forest land can, in both of those, is the funding is also within it with attention to fragmentation or something like that. Judy, I don't know if that would address it, but at least it would call it out explicitly.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
Okay. We'll come back to the other point you made in this as well. So the UVA, people need more time, looks good. What's people's sense, Lauren?
Yeah, I just want to note, I think that Charlie dropped off. He was like mid-sentence and frozen, and I didn't see him now. So.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for catching that. Any other comments on UVA right now?
I will go back and check Charlie's email and make sure something wasn't dropped there. So,
okay.
And if Charlie is able to hear me, by all means, send me anything.
I think I just got a text from, I think his internet crashed. So it sounds like his recommendations are in here and we should carry on.
Yeah, so I wonder whether we should, especially because Charlie's not here to, like, if we want to amend them, maybe we should just note them, leave them in yellow, and address one other point from Judy and move on for now. I mean, we've got new language, which is good. People may need to absorb it, and Charlie's not on right now. I'd hate to.
Oh, and also, just to add that he says we can blame Consolidated Communications, and I would like the public record to show that, because that is what you can blame for mine too. So going on record to say, Consolidated Communications, could you get it together? Thank you.
Noted. All right, and Judy, in terms of the passively managed forest land by fire encompassing, is that we did cover that in part in another recommendation, but do you want to fold that into one of these in some fashion?
Yeah, I think it would be nice. I know we did cover it already.
Why don't we?
Again, it's using traditional ecological knowledge that seems to be getting stepped over.
So I wonder if we can just add I wonder if we could just add as a current action versus an old action, just add a current action in that just does what you just have there, Judy. Support efforts to passively manage enforcement by fire and cops, and just add it as a new recommendation, as a current action, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So unless somebody has any concerns about it, let's just add that to current actions. Marley, maybe make note of that. Yeah, great. All right.
Try and add a line now. It's gonna.
I know it throws off the numbering, which is the problem. So we'll the problem. All right. So I'm aware of the time. It's 10:45. We also need time to talk about the presentation for Monday. We have not dove into 250, which we started on last time. And I want to make sure Lauren's recommendation reworded gets in here because we already talked about that. So I just want to Marley, I sent you an email with the language for Lauren's addition that the group agreed to. I'm not sure where it goes, but I sent you the email with the language. So Billy and Abby, people have been at this for a while. Should we give people a 5-minute break? What do you want to do?
I know I could benefit from one. So selfishly, I'm going to say, yeah, let's everybody just take a quick pause, even if it's just 3 minutes, 2 minutes.
I just got back. Yeah. I just walked into the bathroom with my computer, so I didn't need it, but sure. Others don't have that benefit, so go for it.
For those of us, Billy, that are working on consolidated communications and have to be hardwired, that's not currently an option.
Okay.
So I will not be taking my laptop with me.
We're really learning a lot about each other.
Very careful about your off video. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. Let's come back at 10:50, and we'll proceed as we can. Good. All right, why don't we give people about a minute and then we'll get started. Okay.
Just want to report, Judy just called me and her power is out. So apparently the state of Vermont is shutting down. No, I'm just kidding. But she said if it comes back on, she'll jump back on, but apologies to the group for that.
Lauren, did you just have your hand up?
No, I was just counting to see if we still had quorum with losing both of them, but I think we do.
Good question. Okay, I want to go down to Marley. So we tend to the one we talked about with Lauren first. Can we go down to, I think it's like you said, it's line 81 in the spreadsheet, not the ID number. Right. So I just want to clarify this is what we did right, Lauren, to make sure. We just talked about it earlier. I just want to make sure it's right, so it's in here. That look right?
Yeah, I don't think that actually, I don't think that changes the intent of it, but if people are more comfortable with that language, I'm fine with the change.
Okay. And we just, we worked on it earlier, so we'll strike that part, leave that, and we leave that in there. We can turn this, I think we can turn this to white because I think it's good to go. Okay. I just want to make sure we got that done before we go back. Okay, let's go back up now. We have a bunch of stuff here I'm not sure what to do with. There is a specific thing about the use value appraisal of the UVA regarding municipalities. So I don't know on what looks like the line 9 or ID 97. Is that acceptable? Do people have concerns about that one under UVA? It's different than the stuff that Charlie described.
I would benefit from understanding the intent there. This would basically take a program that, kind of creates some durable restrictions on the use of land, and charges a penalty when that change occurs, and would layer on top of that like an option to purchase for municipalities for like what's probably 15% of the state right now. So it seems like a massive change in the program scope and intent, and has massive financial and legal ramifications. And I just don't understand exactly what the goal is of that change.
Comments, thoughts for who's recommending that? So somebody should explain that.
I think the issue that last time we flagged this was that we weren't sure actually who proposed it. So there was no one to sort of act as the champion to speak for it.
So where did this come from? And maybe we just, I'm not sure what to do with it.
Yeah, I don't support it. So I'll just say that without understanding more the intent. Like, I know that adding an option to purchase creates costs and burdens on landowners. And if the intent is to do so to yield an outcome that's positive for climate, that's fine. But I don't understand that right now.
Ally.
Oh yeah, I just want to say that this came when we were, I don't remember exactly who this came from, but it was like the very beginning when I think we called it throwing spaghetti at the wall, and we were soliciting input from like a bunch of people, but this is what Massachusetts has. So they have in their current use law that this is what they have. It's called right to refusal or something. It's when a landowner wants to sell or subdivide their land, that there's option for the municipality. I don't know if it's actually worked to reduce fragmentation. That would be sort of this sort of gets to the bigger question of what policies actually work to reduce fragmentation. I don't know. I don't necessarily think it's a great idea either, but it was just one of those ones that was never discussed, kind of put in there. You know, and it came from Massachusetts.
So maybe we should just note like it's a mass law further discussion needed or something. Just let's move on for now.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I mean, I would be interested now to actually look at that Massachusetts policy and law and learn a little more about, to Billy's point, like what the intended outcomes are. I mean, I'm sort of guessing that it maybe gives more sort of agency for municipalities to align, you know, land use with their plans and municipal sort of goals. So, and that may or may not be a good thing, depending. So, yeah, I'd be interested in kind of looking further before actually offering this up as something for us to be recommending.
So maybe we, yeah, let's definitely leave it in yellow and just, I think we put Marley further discussion needed in bold. Again, I don't think there's more we can do today. There's some disagreement, but we don't, with some things we don't know. Yeah.
And that's fine. I guess, Pat, just like looking forward, like we have this consensus decision-making model. Like if the vast majority of this group doesn't want this to be part of our recommendations, like at some point we just need to like make those decisions.
Yeah.
So
no, and if
probably not today, but at some point.
To
no,
David's,
Abby, go for it, Abby.
I don't know. I'm just wondering if this might be something based on the fact that we can't, you know, nobody feels overly passionately about this. Is this one of those things that we move to remove it for the moment? Do we want to keep it and try to understand it better to see if there is a way we can adapt it?
Well, let me pose the question. And I think at any point, if you want to raise the question, can we strike it? I can ask the question. So does anyone want to advocate for leaving this in at this time? Lauren.
Definitely not advocating for leaving in. I just have a question. It would be helpful for me because I think there are a couple of current use strategies and actions that are filtered throughout. Be helpful for me to see them kind of collated so I can see all of the different potential changes that we're trying to recommend and see which actually has some teeth or opportunity and or consensus with the group, because it's hard to follow when they're kind of pulled out in different areas. Unless I'm wrong and this is the last that is standing for current use program.
No, it may be both for current use and Act 250. We may need a separate tab just to pull everything together so people can look at them collectively. And we did a lot of people even talk to rural resilience. So totally fair point. Anybody want to advocate for leaving this in? So I'm not hearing any, so Bill, to your point, I'm not hearing any support for it. So I think we can always pull it back in if someone's dying to. Otherwise, I think we're going to strike it, but note the collation question around current use. So I think let's strike it. Let's move it to old action and leave it there. Okay, good. All right, so then here was our bit of a, we prefer to rewrite the language for update Act 250 around forest fragmentation. We wanted to have support for the environmental justice policy or some version of that intent. And we also note that in the new actions as well. And then we also talked about governance of Act 250. So the yellow is language that we worked on last time. What do you want to do with that?
I'm personally fine with the two Act 250 provisions. You know, I'm supportive of the state developing an environmental justice policy. I personally don't know that we need to tie it to a piece of pending legislation, but I don't have a strong opinion there.
I mean, we could, and Judy, are you back on with phone?
Yes.
Okay, good. So if we revise the environmental justice one to say create or support or whatever an environmental justice policy for the state of Vermont without necessarily being specific to a bill, is that okay, or what would you prefer?
I think it's okay. The bill, I just put it in there for so everybody could read it.
let's say you create a statewide environmental justice policy, right? Because that's the intent, is it's statewide, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. All right, cool. All right. Anybody have any concerns about any three of these? Again, whether the justice policy goes here or goes in another place, I'm not sure, but we want to note it. So I think for now we might leave it here. We can always figure out where it goes in a better organization later. Any concerns about any of these two Act 250 or the environmental justice policy statewide? Any concerns about those? Yeah, I couldn't figure out how to do the line item either, Marley. So I'm going to turn these to white unless someone else has questions or comments about that. Okay, let's keep going. There was a new strategy here. I'm not sure where this came from. Marley, do you know the amend the tax policy to incentivize long stewardship of managed forests? Charlie, I don't know if that's Charlie's. I'm not sure where that came from. Marley, do you know if that was the one Charlie added?
Yeah, I believe it was from Charlie, to the best
And
of my recollection.
And we don't have Charlie back, right? All right. So my suggestion is we just leave it in yellow and leave it there for now and move on because we don't have Charlie here to talk about it. Is that okay? And maybe we'll put the bold type in yellow too. Yeah. Just so we note the. Thanks, Marley. Okay. The next one was create a state water ground resources map, water use and water level data. And I think somebody wondered whether that already exists.
To the best of my knowledge, that does not exist statewide.
Okay, so it does not exist statewide. Judy, go ahead.
I think I put that one in there. I used maps that I got from UVM to follow underground waters that go from the Interbell to the lake in order to work on the issue of the PSAs at the high school. And I got them from Walter Pullman's department. So I know they're there. I just don't know like who owns them.
Yeah, Judy, this is actually an action that Dr. Tupini Giroux, who's the state climatologist and also the chair of the drought task force for the state of Vermont. She and I have been pushing for this for a while and for different funding opportunities to get this done. So I'm happy to reach out to her. She's also at UVM. But again, to the best of my knowledge, and I passed this by her months and months ago, it still doesn't exist statewide. Maybe in your area of the state it does, but not broadly.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Maybe not statewide. Okay, thank you.
Lauren, a quick question. I think we can strike the comment. And the question is it someone suggested changing drought conditions to moisture variability? Is that okay, or is it better to say drought?
That was Leslie Ann's recommendation, so I would definitely support it.
Okay, let's just change that thing. Leave it to the expert. Good. All right. I think that one's good to go. All right. Then there's a tax credit piece here, which I don't, I'm not sure we, is this a PS thing? Is this, what do people want to do with this one? Oh, Lauren, go back. Sorry, Lauren, you just said something. Did you say that thing that we just had as a strategy is actually an action?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of a simple do this type of action.
Okay, so Marla, do you want to, it's just an organizational thing, but you just want to note the previous thing we talked about for the groundwater maps is really an action, not a strategy. And you can move it later. There you go. Yeah. Cool. All right. All right. So this was a tax credit question. So what do people want to do with this one? I think there was questions about it where it fits. So I'm not sure what the issues are.
Ryan has his hand up.
Ryan, sorry, thank you. I can't see all that. For some reason, I can't see all the hands right now. Ryan, go for it. Sorry, Ryan.
That's fine. I don't have a comment on this one. I just wanted to return to a previous point when we finished this conversation. whether the incentives for I will provide a comment on this though, but whether a PES program does direct payments, tax credits, whatever reimbursement, I think that's a mechanism. And one of the, I don't know if it's an action or a comment, is maybe this fits better under the broader PES program development statement. And I think it certainly could as an option to explore. And I think any PES program development would perhaps look at this an option for compensation that would look at tax crediting. So I don't think it's not being looked at.
So maybe what do people feel about if it would go under another pathway, it might be folded in as consider this mechanism. So would people be okay if we kind of leave it in, but kind of subsume it in broader PS discussions and other pathways? Anybody ever concerned about that?
I think that makes a lot more sense to have it be within the PES mechanism conversation.
I agree.
So that it's all being analyzed in the same bucket.
Is that accurate?
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Marley. All right. I have Ryan, why don't you go next?
Hi, Pat. Yeah. Just comment line 72, ID 123.
Give Marley a minute to find that.
Might have to zoom out in the comment section. So we're talking about the development of programs. So if you go over to the comment, there's an editorial, it's inaccurate, it's also open to working lands. I mean, I think this program is a square peg round hole type instance. It's generally intended. I don't have a breakdown in front of me of the percentage of funding that goes to CSOs and large municipal stormwater projects, but it's a loan program. And if we're going to make recommendations for programming that's going to support the adoption and implementation of practices and other management on farms, I think we'd want to build a program that we've enjoyed a lot of success in, which focuses on grant and technical assistance programs. I think trying to leverage an existing funding source where the vast majority of funding goes to infrastructure investment for stormwater and CSO management, I don't think is, we can explore it, but I think my comment doesn't need it in an editorial comment there in red, is intended or is primarily used, you can modify it. But yeah, it's open to working lands, but I personally don't think it's a great fit in this conversation.
I was merely clarifying that those funds are currently being used for natural lands as well as municipal lands. I'm happy to delete the comment.
Okay.
It wasn't a
there's a lot of comments
whether
that
or
could
not
have.
there should be another funding source. It was just a clarification of that funding source.
Okay, Billy.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that, absolutely, this fund traditionally has been used for the infrastructure Ryan's talking about. We have in recent years been providing loans out of the revolving loan fund as bridge financing for large scale conservation projects. We've been letting, for instance, the Vermont Land Trust borrow at a low rate from that fund to purchase a property, hold it while a conservation deal is being developed, and then paying back the loan fund with the proceeds of that conservation deal. So that is an active use of the fund right now. And I think this is just suggesting kind of expanding that use. So no one's wrong here. I think Ryan's very right in what he's saying about how it's used typically, but that is a function of this revolving loan fund currently.
I think, Billy, I agree. I think my broader comment is let's fund the conservation process so we don't have to have a loan system to ensure that land conservation deals to ensure they can be closed and financed appropriately.
Yeah, it's just, I agree with you. I agree with you. It's just like sometimes you got to buy something immediately. And as you know, land conservation, even when fully funded, could take some time to work through. So it's a stopgap measure, but hear what you're saying.
I think for the comment, Marley, I think we should know SRF is primarily a loan program for municipal wastewater CSOs, which is true. And you guys have used it in some interesting ways. So I think we put in that, it reminds us of this conversation when we come back to it if we have to. So the SRF is primarily or mainly or chiefly, whatever. Yeah. I didn't know you could use it for that. Good to know. Okay, and Brian, there was another thing in there, and maybe more of this was your comment. There was another thing under line item number 181 that had state policy has known that loss. I don't know if we need to do anything there. Yeah.
Yeah, I just, that's a factual statement based on testimony submitted by the Agency of Natural Resources to the Vermont Wetland Study Committee, which says that available data indicates that there is no net loss of wetland acreage in Vermont, and we are gaining wetlands. That comment is simply intended to state that the current wetland policy has resulted in a net gain of wetlands. And that was simply an informational point that is being provided, and I don't think it's inaccurate, and I'm pasting, the document from which that testimony was submitted into the chat.
So let me just be clear, the policy is no net loss, but the actual result of there's been a net gain. Is that the point?
Based on DEC's testimony to the Vermont Wetland Study Committee, yes.
Yeah, so I think it's not the policy doesn't have I want to be clear, the policy I thought we were clear was no net loss, but the result has been actually a gain.
Yeah, I agree, Pat. I think that comment then needs to reflect that the wetland policy that has resulted in a net gain of wetlands, so that it isn't necessarily conflated as a net gain policy.
Thank you. More you said about it than I did. Good, thank you. All right.
Is that okay, Ryan?
I mean, I don't see many other people's comments being edited, but that's fine.
So they were in red, that's why I was editing. So sorry about that. It wasn't intended to call those up. They were in red, that's why I was focused on. I'm sorry. Okay, so I do want to kind of leave. I don't know, I'm not sure why those were in red, but we'll noted. There's one other issue on pollinator planting, ID 41. And there was.
I don't know what the issue was here necessarily, but I'm wondering if we should, or I'm wondering if the issue was flagged because we're trying to, as much as possible, not have solar be developed in fields. And maybe that's where part of this was. The other thing I was going to say is I think there are two separate actions potentially here. Like I certainly would support both like in the incentivizing or funding of pollinator planting in solar fields. And I also would support incentivizing or funding pollinator planting broadly, whether to do with solar or not. But I don't know why this was in yellow specifically. I don't remember.
If you go over to the comment, and this isn't my comment, but I think someone is trying to make the case that like just planting pollinator species in a solar field doesn't mean it's good, a net benefit for biodiversity. So just being clear that this isn't a way to kind of greenwash an impact.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
So David Mears.
Billy captured, it was my comment and Billy summarized it correctly.
So what do we do with this one then? Leave it there. We've got a whole bunch of solar recommendations in another tab that's primarily about, emissions reductions. What do you want to do with this one?
Can we tie this action into the solar category and in addition call out the need for increased education funding for pollinator planting and biodiversity, increased education around biodiversity support? Oh, Judson says there's another action for general pollinator habitat. I thought maybe there was.
Let's see, John and then Lauren.
I was just going to mention that there's, I actually was on a webinar 2 days ago, a kind of an international one, had farmers from Australia and other places and talking about cover cropping, but there was a lot of them planting pollinator buffers in Europe and in the Midwest in order to encourage insects so they can reduce treatments for invasive for insect problems, and that there's some real evidence that so there's a climate benefit because you reduce chemical use, and so we need more education there.
The pollinator one came up with the public comment too, so we may make sure that is folded into all these at some point, and as Judson said, it's in another place as well. Lauren.
Just a broader statement that instead of just thinking of things as regulatory opportunities or programmatic funding opportunities, Billy and I talked when we were doing the built environment consolidation about keeping a list of actions or strategies that could be implemented by just like regular Vermonters, like individual Vermonters who might want to look at the climate action plan to say like, okay, great, here are all the good things that the state is doing, that the feds are doing, that, you know, NGOs, et cetera, but like, what can I be doing to move the needle on my own land or in my own community networks? And I think this might be, instead of just saying for solar fields, the pollinator habitat, that might just be something we might want to flag, because we haven't really done that yet. I think it would be really important to make it an accessible and I don't know, empowering plan for the general public.
Okay, other thoughts on this for now? I think maybe we'll leave it in yellow. We may move it. We note that it's not a substitute for sort of more, you know, wildland pollination, et cetera. And we know John's point about pollination more broadly in maybe a tool in a number of ways. Okay, so that gets us through, I believe, Pathway F, and then Billy and Abby, I think Pathway G doesn't have any further comments. There are a bunch of new ideas we're just not going to have time to get to today, but they're under no pathway assigned, the last tab, so they're not lost. And we will have, and a lot of them are food systems based, so I think we'll have to come back to that. So I just want to note we're probably out of time with the matrix now. We've done some really good work today. So I wonder whether the task now is any final things people want to raise in the matrix. Marley, if God willing, would clean it up, and this is what we'd submit to the Climate Council for our work to date. Is there any other issue people want to raise right now as we try to wrap up the matrix just for today?
We are amazingly ahead of schedule, so we do have about 10 minutes on this agenda item if we want to use it, but not saying we have to, but we do have a little tiny bit of time left.
Because of all your guys' good work on Wednesday, that extra time.
Oh, actually, no, I'm sorry. We skipped the discussion key points for the discussion. So yeah, no, we're actually way over time. Sorry.
Half hour over time. Yeah, but it was, I like it. All right, so let me be clear. So with the caveats that Judy said, that this is a work in progress, there's not full agreement on everything, we needed more time, we're doing the best we can. Here's our work to date, in the spreadsheet for the Vermont Council to look at and certainly give comments back on one or more issues, with plenty of work yet to come. So is there anything else people want to raise? Because this is going to be, with Marley's cleaning up, as you've already seen her do in real time. She's gonna do some cleanup. You'll get it. Also, we'll get it. Abby.
Just want to raise that Jake and I are going to try to put our heads together to work, to make sure that some of the food security issues and things like that are called out enough. So as long as we understand that there may be more actions we need to add in as we realize where we're missing things, I think I'm fine. I know that we don't have quite enough there, but I also know that we have to move forward at this point. So just noting that.
All right, so I think Lauren, over to you.
Not sure, I missed on Friday's meeting, so I'm not sure if during the ag stakeholder event update to the full subcommittee, if we talked about the fact that something that was raised in my group, and I don't know if others, but Judson was there too, was the comment that there wasn't much by way of pesticide herbicide use and reducing that, even though in statute there's a reduction of toxic chemical use. So I just want to flag that somebody noted it. Judson and I were both like, oh, I guess we don't have anything on that just yet. And that we promised to that group and maybe the larger ag stakeholder group that we would talk about it as I don't know if that's a 5C thing or a full subcommittee thing, but noting that it's missing now.
I added in a new action around it there with some targets and some, hopefully maybe some thinking about better tracking across all sectors. So trying to think not just with ag with pesticides, but playgrounds, municipalities, you know, town greens, golf courses, and, you know, do we have a tracking system in place? How do we know where they're at? How do we know where they're being used and things like that? But it's in that list of things that's new that we haven't discussed.
It's on line spreadsheet line 10 of the no pathways is the nice piece that Abby wrote up that we know needs to get folded in. It just it's sitting there right now for now. Jake.
Yeah, just comment on the pesticides piece. So the food system strategic plan, the 10-year plan that we have, has an objective of a 20% reduction in pesticide use in the state. So if we want to use that as an initial kind of benchmark, and certainly there can be policies written to that objective. I think, you know, from the ag and food system plan perspective, we see those reductions coming from you know, greater support for, you know, grazing practices and technical assistance for, you know, certain types of production. So there's, yeah, and then there definitely are, I think, some direct mechanisms that can also help achieve that objective, obviously.
Good. Other comments on the matrix or issues where we are before we talk about where to from here? Okay, so I just put in chat what I think is the caveat language we put in front of this thing. And just to kind of note, and then again, this is putting our best effort to date forward. It's, again, other than cleanup, it's going to be all that you see here. Any questions or concerns before I check to see if the group is okay forwarding it to the Climate Council a little bit later today? Okay. So I think this is the best where we are at. So with those caveats, is anybody not okay with forwarding this to the Vermont Climate Council as our best work to date, but yet still in progress?
I have a question.
Ask away.
So as we've put it together, is going to be sent to the council, the full council. Is, as we put it together, also going to be sent to the legislators?
Good question. Who does this? And I don't know whether Jane and Marianne, like, this certainly goes to the council. Does it goes back to you all?
Yeah, so I can just quickly jump in. So this is, and I think we're going to go over this later, but this is our just a very initial set of draft recommendations going to the council so they can understand where we're at in our process and provide some initial high-level feedback to the subcommittees as we move into the next month, where we're going to do the equity screening, the prioritization based on the 5 principles that the steering committee has established, and come up with a final suite of recommendations for the council. So this isn't going to the legislature or anyone at this point. This is just getting an initial read from the council to get some feedback. We'll take that feedback and we'll continue working as a group. Then we'll serve our recommendations up to the council. And then they ultimately will decide what goes in the climate action plan. Do I have that right, Jane?
Jane, I think, is in a conversation, but yes, so Billy is correct in saying this is sort of the first cut at those actions that will go to the council on Tuesday for review and comment and feedback back to the subcommittees. You'll have another opportunity to present these to the council at the end of October. Eventually, when the plan is adopted on December 1st, that full plan, which will include all of the actions that you all feed through the subcommittee after further feedback and conversation with the council and other public input that you all receive. We're anticipating that your spreadsheets will be attached as attachments to the plan so that you'll have that full record as well as the narrative of the actions in the plan. And that will be, the legislature is looking for that plan after December 1st. So eventually it will go there, but right now, Judy, it's just for conversation within the council.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions about the disposition of this thing for the moment? Okay. Does anybody object to then us forwarding this to the Vermont Climate Council with Marley's cleanup a little bit later today? Anybody object to forwarding it to the council? Okay, you've done great and hard and laborious work. Tremendous kudos to all of you. So this is the good work that will go to the council for them to give you some feedback on. I think what we should probably do now then is talk about the slides and Billy and Abby's presentation on Tuesday. And then if we have time, we can talk about after today, but we have to get through today. So we'll focus on that first. So Billy and Abby. And we have, I think, draft, I don't really have draft slides, Billy, or how we want to handle the question of like what and how you present to the council on Tuesday.
So I just want to do a quick time check first. So we have about 35 minutes left. We have that agenda item. We have looking towards October and kind of work planning. And then we were going to get an update from Jane on kind of how we're going to prioritize and do our equity screen. I want to make sure that we've got time for all that. So let's have this conversation now, mindful that we still need to hit on some of those other topics. Is that okay with everybody?
I'll do timekeeping and keep it to about 10 minutes each. So go forth.
Okay. So yeah, I think we have a template. I haven't looked at it recently, but I believe it's pretty similar to the one that we presented to the council earlier this summer that has slides for pathways and select strategies that are representative. And I think, you know, and Marion, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's still the expectation for next week, is that the council will get the full list and it's kind of on them to review it and share their written comments. But there will be time at the meeting for Abby and I to go through the pathway strategies and any particular themes or actions that we feel garner specific attention from the council.
Yeah, that's correct. So I think you'll want to talk a little bit about, and your conversations today sort of lended themselves well to, I think, what you may want to talk about on Tuesday, but highlighting those actions. So you'll be showing all of your pathways and all of your strategies and, you know, a handful or one or two actions that you think you want feedback from the council on, or you feel very strongly about as a subcommittee should move forward, and you want the council to understand that this is something you're really interested in pushing forward, or something that may be controversial that we need to start having conversations about now so that we can receive comments and come back. So I think identifying what those are for Billy and Abby to start building that PowerPoint presentation would be a useful use of time.
So maybe verbally or in the chat, if there's particular things you want them to emphasize on Tuesday or areas that you want to highlight or kind of still in major discussion mode that we will continue on either here and or with other subcommittees. You know, why don't we like just kind of shout them out and so we can begin to have those.
And Marilee, if there are things that, for example, you want us to be giving the full council a heads up as to, like, this is really important, and or we're having some trickiness with this and needing their, trying to gauge the sense of the full council as to where maybe they're at on some of those issues that might be trickier, such as Act 250, for example, or, you know, in that vein.
Or like the river corridor conversation.
Yep.
That might be one to highlight.
Yeah, I do wish we were a little bit more mindful of this as we work today and Wednesday, because I think the things that we spent time on were probably those things to flag. I don't have them at the top of my brain, but I'm sure we could, with a little bit of work, go back and kind of compile them.
Just thinking really, it's not, so like biomass facilities is going to be one. Kind of the, and please, anybody speak up, as I'm just sort of trying to get, I'm just shouting these out, and then we can, the sort of maybe questions around the specifics of where do we suggest regulatory frameworks, where do we suggest funding or incentives, things like that, maybe. Act 250, current use, I'm not sure, but I am really feeling like I need, like I want to be really clear on what this subcommittee feels like they need from the Climate Council to understand how we move forward.
And I just put in, just from what Abby said and a few others that came to mind, is just, it seems like some of the things that you talked about that are probably worth highlighting to the council. And I suspect there may be others, so now is the time to kind of name them. We've already brought to the council the question of net versus gross emissions. So that's already kind of before the council. Solar siding is another good one. Great. So solar siding, Alyssa, go for it.
Yeah, I don't think this is controversial, but I think it's worthwhile to highlight the importance of like capacity building for land managers as being critical to their ability to both enact the greenhouse gas emissions reduction practices and goals, but also resilience. And so just, there are a lot of different recommendations of ours that point to capacity building, but I think highlighting that as a major theme for this sector would be great to include in your presentation. I also wanted to say the presentation that David and I gave for our stakeholder outreach piece is something we could certainly share and has some of the like high level and then lower level pieces in it. I don't know if that's useful to you, Abby and Billy, but that's around.
Alyssa, do you mind? I'm not sure what form it's posted in. Do you mind just actually shooting that to Billy and Abby if you have the PowerPoint version, just so they have the amenable version? Great, thank you, Judy.
So a concern I think should be elevated that I've brought up several times is this concept of equity as it refers to more electricity and the use of electricity for from Hydro-Quebec, because there is no equity if we take more electricity from Hydro-Quebec. It's going to simply increase the loss of native lands and increase the loss of diversity, plant diversity and animal diversity.
Abby.
I don't know that we've had this conversation in these terms at this committee, but I wonder if maybe we need to say that if we feel like what Judy is getting at least from my understanding of the way that emissions are calculated and things like that, is life cycle accounting, and a life cycle understanding of how our energy sources, et cetera, are being captured. And so do we need to say that we are in support of pursuing life cycle accounting as we move forward?
Judy, did you have another point, or are you all set?
No, it's just like when I gave that presentation and I talked about 80% of the diverse plants is in the hands of Native people. And if we keep pleasing ourselves with all this electricity from Hydro-Quebec, each time we decrease the amount of plant diversity up there and the lack of community life for Native people. And there is no equity in that.
Good. Other things people want to note? Or the co-chairs be thinking about? All right, Billy and Abby, any questions you want to ask of the group? We've got 3 minutes left before we go to the next topic.
I don't think so. Just in order to, I agree with Judy's concerns and the concerns she's raising. I also have gotten the sense that those are being raised in many other, from public comment, et cetera, and many other iterations. And so I guess I just want to confirm with the subcommittee that, you're comfortable with Billy and I going in front of the Climate Council and saying, we too have concerns in these areas, and we are, recommending that life cycle accounting is pursued.
Anybody have a concern about bringing forth that concern that Judy just named? All right, I think you're good to carry that forward.
So yeah, Abby and I will probably try to find some time between now and next Tuesday when we have our presentation to pull those examples out in a more clear way, so we're better prepared to speak to them. But this is a great start, so thanks everybody.
All right, and then Billy and Abby, just because of timing, I'm assuming obviously the subcommittee will get a copy of the slides when it's posted for the Vermont Climate Council. I assume you'll need Monday to kind of get those all organized and ready to go.
Yeah, I think Marley's already actually put the pathways and strategies into a slide deck, which is super. And then I think we just need to kind of come up with some of the action areas that we want to bring to the council's attention.
And again, Billy and I can coordinate on this, but if it's helpful, we can try to at least get that out to the group with the language around what we just talked about here, you know, by sometime on close of business Monday, so that at least people can shoot us things before we have to present on it on Tuesday afternoon.
All right. So again, if we'll have a quick look at it and shoot comments back really quickly just because of timing. Okay, any other questions on that? We'll move to our next topic. Okay, now that you're all exhausted from the hard work you've done, now we get to look forward to the next work we have to do. So Jane, do you want to talk about the steering committee's guidance on prioritization and equity screening? And I see Kaya's on the phone too, which is actually really great as well. So I don't know whether Jane, Marion, you want to speak to next steps there?
I think Jane was going to speak to prioritization, and I'm hesitant to do so because she's been working on this more than I have. I think perhaps it might be good to introduce Kaya. So for everyone, and Kaya, welcome to the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee meeting. Kaya has been contract assigned, and she is going to be our equity facilitator with the subcommittees to work on working with you all on putting actions through the Just Transitions equity screening tool and using that process to really assess equity in your action. So let me text Jane. I'll turn it over to Kaya. It's really exciting to have you on board, and I'll just open it up if you want to say anything to the subcommittee.
Hi all, nice to meet you. I'm Kaya Morris. I use she, her pronouns. So I'm very excited to be able to work with you all. I'm kind of just observing today's meeting, and I wish I could have come earlier, but was chasing down some EJ funding for some of the different work happening in communities around this work. But so I will be joining you all on a regular basis beginning next week, and we'll be working with your co-chairs and other consultants on trying to build in agendas that will actively allow for us to go through and utilizing the screening tools and having deeper conversations around an equity screening of the actions and great ideas and work that you're putting forth. So we will have plenty to talk about in the very near future. And in the meantime, I'm kind of getting situated. I will put my contact email in the chat if there's ever individuals that want to speak to me on a one-to-one basis, or you have questions in the interim. I'm more than happy to make myself available to connect with everyone. So I'm very excited to work with you all and to see the incredible work that you've done so far. Thanks.
Thanks, Kaya.
Thank you. Super excited to have you on board.
Thanks, Kaya. I think I'll turn it over to Jane now. We have Jane back.
Jane, prioritization, next steps for how the steering committee is giving us direction and moving forward beyond today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry to step away for a little bit. So prioritization, you'll all remember that at the council meeting last week, we made improvements to the process around how we would review actions in the name of prioritization. And since then, we've had further conversations with Kaya in her new role, as well as with the co-chairs earlier this week, thinking about a stepwise approach to prioritization and how the review of the equity component actually will fit into that, a recognition that we will not be able to screen all of our actions through the scoring rubric in time for the first climate action plan. So there is a need to move our actions through prioritization and lift up the high priority ones in order to then lean into the conversations of the ones that will be implemented most quickly in the first climate action plan, and review those with respect to equity and consider a further plan for how and when further actions will be reviewed using the scoring rubric. Marion and I are meeting on Monday to finalize the prioritization guidance for subcommittees and the templates needed to share with you all. We also have a meeting that day with the cross-cutting counselor group that will be looking at the CAP as well as CAP drafting. We plan to share the final prioritization with that group in a nod for any comments, and then roll it out Monday to the subcommittees who are expected to apply and utilize that with a guidance around the timeline. Next week at your subcommittee meetings, we plan to ask for co-chairs to give us space on the agenda to walk through that prioritization, go through any remaining questions around it, as well as invite Kaya in to think about like clearly how the equity component will work for the actions that you prioritize. So that's all I have really in that space, although if there was time, one of the things I will suggest, and my idea has been to actually have a discussion of this with the cross-cutting ideas group rather than you all as a subcommittee, is one of the first prioritization components we'll be looking at impact of the action. And for cross-sector mitigation, this is clearly defined by the amount of emissions being reduced by the action, and we'll have some general guidance around what that looks like based on the analyses that are underway for the specific pathways and the scenarios. But for all of you, that would have applied to the measurable goals that you had looked at putting forward back in August. But since we weren't ever able to get there explicitly, Marion thoughtfully pulled in two different definitions to consider for impact in the sequestration, resilience, and adaptation space that get us to thinking about a high, medium, and low ranking for impact. One is taken from the state's hazard mitigation plan and another from a different climate action plan. And our idea, we were going to look at those with subcommittees to see how they relate to you, and if there is a preference for one that you would like to see in prioritization. But my suggestion is so that we ensure dialogue between rural resilience and ag and eco, that we bring it to the cross-cutting ideas group on Monday, because we want consensus on what the impact definition will be.
Questions?
That's all I have. Yeah.
No. Thanks, Jane. Jane, it's also, I know we talked about rural resilience last week about the idea of if we identify people from this group who will help draft the sections of the final report that have to do with ag and eco, because there's not only a matrix to prioritize and look at the equity screen and clean up, there's also the narrative that goes in the actual report. So I don't know, co-chairs or Jane or Marion, whether we need to identify today or soon after the few folks who are going to kind of begin to draft under the guidance of the steering committee, obviously the language for this subcommittee.
Yeah, that's a great point, Pat. We have a more detailed CAP outline that articulates specific names of the task leads under each section related to your subcommittee, and then ensures that there's state staff to support those task leads if wanted. In helping create that shitty first draft, which is a common term used around here, for back and forth engagement with counselors. And so happy as we look at next week with prioritization, we could spend some more substantive time also looking at the CAP outline and specific names next to each section that relate to the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee, and ensure that clear authorship is directed.
Abby.
Jane answered some of my questions. I was more curious about the actual logistics of it, because I mean, I'm happy to edit things and look at things. I can even try to write some things, but I'm a little curious about the mechanisms with open, like how that actually literally works in a document, before I try to say, yes, I can help, or no, just because of. And so I'm wondering if we could have some clarification about like the actual, what that task looks like for somebody who takes it on.
Yeah, that's great. So we need to put together, Marion and I, this is, we've talked to the CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer for the state, to create a template on our SharePoint site that we're all feeding into, but we intend to use the SharePoint site that we have in order to put different components of drafting in, so that we're all building into the same file. And if you have a state partner address, you can access that SharePoint site to do so.
Other questions about that? And then we'll talk a little bit about schedule just to scare you, and then we'll go from there. So I think, and Jane, Mary, and others, correct me if I'm wrong. So I think the challenge for October is, we still have a fair amount of work to do on our matrix to kind of get it clean, talk about things we didn't talk about, finish up things we did, but we didn't finish. So there's that task. There's then the task of then taking those things and making sure that we, prioritize them, do the equity screen. And at the same time, somewhere in the middle of all of October, some small subgroup is going to have to be writing, this into words for the actual plan, which you all will need to review that language, of course, as it gets developed. And then you need to kind of finish all of that. And I think forward both the kind of the written language and the matrix in whatever fashion it's formally in, to the Climate Council by the end of October. So there is a bundle to do in a short time that the co-chairs with Marion and Jane will think about and try to come back to you next week with how we try to, do all that, because it's a bundle. Or Jane and Marion, you want to add anything to my terrifying schedule comment? All right, Billy and Abby, I think that actually covered a lot of what we're going to need to do. But Billy, Abby, back over to you.
Yeah, great. And just I know I've spoke with Kaya and Abby about the need, Pat, for the four of us ideally to get together early next week and sit down and talk about the agenda for next Friday. So maybe at the end of this call, we could, the four of us can think about that. I think, Tuesday morning, maybe a time that works for folks, but if y'all could just hang on for a second when we're down here to nail that down, that'd be great. All right, where are we with our agenda? Well, I think we're at public comment. So before we go there, I just thinking about next Friday, I guess at this point, we don't have a clear homework assignment for folks other than just to kind of keep working through the revised spreadsheet, thinking about the items that we left unsettled from today, and know that we're going to need to go back and resolve those in the future. So if you've got things that you want to research or specific questions that you want to dig into further, maybe spend some time identifying those so that when we do revisit that sheet for prioritization and to find ultimate consensus and screen for equity, people's questions will be crisp. Does that sound good?
And Billy, Marley just noted at the end of the call today, if she could have a few minutes with us, just to her task to clean the matrix up for today, she needs as well.
Sounds good. All right, well, unless I hear, Abby and I hear from any subcommittee members that they'd like to discuss anything else, I think we can move on to public comment. All right, so just a big thanks to everyone. This was a tremendous amount of work this week, a lot of hours in this Zoom environment and outside, and some challenging topics to work through. So thanks everyone for your continued commitment and good work and civility as we manage our process. So members of the public, I see Zach's hands up. Anyone else care to share comments right now? Let's see, Jennifer. Okay, so we've got Zach and Jennifer. Let's go in that order. And if anyone else emerges, we can fit them in. So take it away, Zach.
If I may, Jennifer, would you mind going first? I just need one more second. Just to.
Sure, that's fine. Thanks. And thank you to everyone. This has been extraordinary to see the work that's been done. I can't seem to get my video on here, but that's all right. There, now it's on. So first of all, just thank you so much for all of this. I think I'll start backwards. Just a quick comment on incentivizing and funding pollinator planting. I think one sentence that, or one portion, one phrase that might be added is in consultation with experts who are aware of best practices. I think there's a lot known in the state of Vermont on what best practices currently are. And they run the gamut from where and what should be planted, including, not including perhaps endangered and threatened plant species and things like that. So I think folks at Fish and Wildlife are aware, and there are others there. And I just wondered if the revised Excel spreadsheet would be posted. I assumed that it would be. But I just wanted to hope that it was. And then my final comment has to do with essentially being, well, two more comments. One, I really appreciated Judy's comment about, in particular, putting effort and money and time into essentially revamping communities that are flooded out. And it's going to happen more, and it's going to happen worse than what we've had. And so that made me think a lot about mandates versus recommendations, and just wondering to what extent the overall Vermont Climate Council's move toward the Global Solutions, Global Warming Solutions Act was going to be. And I know mandates are scary and perhaps won't be effective from this group, but I think, you know, it really gave me pause in thinking about that. So I appreciated that. Then the final comment I had was to say how thrilled I am with the idea that there may be posed recommendations for revising UVA and including, for example, managing for old growth characteristics, and in allowing landowners to have ecological reserves, essentially, in which timber harvest is not conducted. So I just wanted to applaud those efforts. And I'm thrilled that Kaya Morris is going to be involved as well. Thank you so much, everybody.
May I just respond really quickly to one component of what Jennifer said? I think part of regarding the council, and I know that this is something that Judy and I have talked about and others, and I think it's one of the kind of, I'll call it interesting tension points of this work, and the role of the subcommittees versus the role of the council versus the role of the legislature. And so I agree with you in terms of thinking about really carefully about the language that we put forward. I also think I just have to keep reminding myself too that at the end of the day, whatever we reach consensus on, we need to move forward with and do the best that we can to try to illustrate where we're at as a group. But also too, the council ultimately decides what moves forward, and then from there that goes to the legislature, and ultimately they decide what to do with that, and whether mandate is language we put forward. I mean, we can put forward mandate as language, but whether that's going to be where the rulemaking and the laws actually end up at the end of this, or in the policies, I think it's not entirely clear to me that we haven't, I mean, it is entirely clear to me that we don't actually have any control over that. So I think much appreciation for your consideration of like the careful choice of the words that we use. I just, that's something I'm thinking about a lot lately.
Thanks, Abby. And I'll just add that the current use program does currently have a provision for ecological treatment areas. You know, I think there's certainly discussion to expand current use further to incorporate other sorts of management, but there clearly are provisions for ecological areas currently. So thanks for those comments. And Zach, take it away.
Thanks, everybody. Sorry, I'm coming out just pale from the sun here. I just wanted to make a couple substantive comments on the conversation just now, some of the updates that you all were discussing on the spreadsheet. And thank you for just all the time that you all have put into this. It is exciting to see where this is going, and there are many great things that will come from all of your efforts, and Vermonters will owe you for a long time. And so just a couple of things that I wanted to ask some specific questions about. I'm grateful that there is a specific there's several updates related to that wildlands category and use value appraisal. Thank you, Charlie. I don't think Charlie's back on, but for walking us through that. I wanted to just point out some things where I think that could be made even stronger than what's in there now, which is that right now, the way that this is worded, it will be extremely limited in its application. If we really want to expand the use value appraisal program to maintain forest cover in Vermont, we should make it as easy as possible for Vermont landowners who otherwise qualify for use value to enroll. If people want to have their lands in use value as wildlands, we shouldn't be kind of creating criteria that make it so that it's hard to enroll those lands that people want to manage as wild. And right now there is a kind of double standard where, if you want to cut trees on your property, it's easy to enroll in UVA. It doesn't really matter what the conditions are today of that land. If you wanted to enroll your land so that it someday becomes a healthy forest passively, that option is not available with the way that this is written right now, because what's going to happen is it's going to be limited to just people who have attained a certain condition of their forest lands before they can enroll in UVA. So my recommendation here is to change this to simply saying, where a landowner with 25 or more forested acres chooses to enroll its land as wildland reserve, they should be eligible to enroll in this category, rather than creating some kind of complicated criteria that really limits who can enroll, which doesn't really help us get to where we need to go anytime soon. The other thing related to that point that I wanted to mention is that there's some language in here that kind of sidesteps the opportunity that you all have to actually offer direction. The number 2 sub-action on that same use value topic says to explore and do more research into the idea of this new category of use value. We don't need more research. We just need to suggest that we develop a new category. You've heard from many people here and in the forest stakeholder meetings earlier that this is something that Vermonters want. And so I encourage you to not kind of allow analysis paralysis to get in the way of moving this forward as quickly as possible. Make a clear direction to the agencies that are responsible, FPR, and to the state legislature that this is what we want to see happen. So it should just say simply, develop a new category of enrollment for land in UVA. And that would get at, just the urgency of creating this option rather than, kind of kicking the can down the road and losing this opportunity that you have as the subcommittee here, relevant subcommittee, to make a real strong recommendation. I just lastly wanted to make sure that some of those edits that Jane was referencing about the acreage targets and a real commitment, a solid commitment to 30 by 30 was in here. I might be missing it. Maybe it's in the spreadsheet, but I wanted to just check to make sure that that was there. And so maybe somebody could simply respond to that. But yeah, I'll leave it there for now. Thank you for the chance to comment and thank you for all of your time.
Thanks, Zach. Okay, unless there's any other members of the public who are interested in speaking, I think we are adjourned for today. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. And if Abby, Pat, Kaya, and I don't mind sticking around for some scheduling, and Marley, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I know that Billy said this earlier, but I want to reiterate it again. I know that this has been a slog. I know it's taken a lot. I know that my family currently doesn't want to talk to me anymore. So I just really appreciate everybody's commitment to this and sticking along, and hope you can get a little bit of respite over the weekend and we can dive back in as we hit the final stretch. Really, really appreciate all of you, including the folks of the public who continue to show up and help us along our path. Thanks.
And Zach, your question of numbers, I think we're not sure. We need to go back and look at that. So I think we're gonna have to figure out where those numbers were or aren't. And so we have an action item to attend to those there.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. Thanks so much. Have a good weekend.
Billy, I made you co-host. Can you stop recording? I forgot to. Or I made you host so that I can leave. You can end the meeting.